Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight, in 7 scary true graveyard horror stories, we step through the rusted gates of cemeteries where names are carved in stone. Flowers wither overnight and the earth itself remembers what we try to forget. These are chilling accounts of bells that toll without wind, whispers leaking from cracked mausoleums, and footsteps echoing across gravel paths when you know you are utterly alone. This is a new channel, and my goal this month is to reach 3,000 subscribers. Almost 90% of viewers watch and leave without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Subscribe now. Before we begin, share in the comments where you're watching from and what hour of the night it is for you. And if there is a cemetery in your town that unsettles you, type its name. Because once you step past the gates of these haunted resting grounds, not everything allows you to leave. Kill the lights, silence the world, take a slow breath, and let us begin. I don't care if anyone believes me. I just need to put this out there before I talk myself into thinking it was a dream. I'm a rideshare driver on the southwest side of Chicago. Part-time, mostly weekends and late nights after my day job at a copy shop. I'm not superstitious. I'm the guy who laughs at ghost tours and tells people the orbs are dust. I used to call myself a professional de-escalator. Keep the car clean, keep the music low, don't argue about politics. The weirdest thing before this had been a guy who tried to pay me in scratch-off tickets and a woman who insisted on holding my front passenger headrest like it was a subway pole. This started on a Wednesday in October 2 years ago. The air had that thin snap to it, the kind that makes you notice your breath even if it's not cold enough to see it. I do a regular circuit, Cicero, Garfield Ridge, Summit, then out past Archer Avenue if the app drags me south. I had my usual thermos of bad coffee by my knee, and my dash cam blinking its little red dot like a heartbeat. The radio was low, all static between AM stations, and every once in a while I'd get this smell of roses. Not strong, just a note that made me think of my grandmother's soap. I actually checked the vents like someone had tucked a car freshener in there as a joke. I picked up 2 runs from Midway, both to Bedford Park hotels, and then the map went quiet. I drifted down Archer, that long stretch with too many stoplights synced to punish you. There are nights Archer looks like someone stretched it with both hands. Same asphalt, same sodium streetlights, a long ribbon going nowhere. If you've driven it, you know what I mean. It plays tricks on distance. The app chimed. Pickup. Archer and 63rd, front of the ballroom. The Willowbrook Ballroom used to be the kind of place that made old-timers go soft in the eyes. Big bands, anniversaries, the whole thing. It burned down in 2016, but people still mark time by it. I pulled over where the pin was, which put me in front of the charred lot. Chain link fence, graffiti. A wind that sounded like it came from underneath the road. The app said passenger Mary. She wasn't there when I stopped. I thumbed I've arrived and glanced at the clock. 11:27 p.m. The radio found a station and then lost it again. I was about to cancel when I saw her in the side mirror, walking along the fence. White dress, knee length, not costume white but old white. Like a wedding dress kept in a closet too long. She wasn't barefoot. She had those small pumps with a strap, the kind my sister wore to confirmations. She didn't wave. She came around to the back door on the passenger side and got in. Mary? I asked because you ask, even though I could see the app. She said, yes, soft, like a yes you'd use in church. Her hair was pale in the streetlights. Not blonde exactly, more ash. She was young. 20, 22? I saw a little smudge of something on her cheek like mascara rubbed away. She sat straight-backed and folded her hands in her lap. No purse, no phone in her hand. I noticed she wasn't wearing a coat, even though the night had that damp chill that sneaks in through the door seams. I flinched at my own impulse to offer her my hoodie. Professionals don't do that. You don't make it weird. Where to? I asked. She said, home, and then added after a second, on Archer. People say that sometimes. Short hops. I glanced at the app again and saw the destination hadn't populated. Sometimes the GPS glitches. I said, what intersection? She hesitated like she had to choose an answer. By the cemetery. Now if you're from around here, you've already got a picture in your head. Resurrection Cemetery sits off Archer like a dark lake. The fence is tall, the gates are Art Deco, and you see it whether you want to or not. I told myself she probably meant a subdivision across from it. There are a few. I put the car in gear. Okay, I said. I'll head south. You tell me when to turn. We slid through lights. She didn't look out the window like most people do. She watched the rearview mirror. Maybe she was watching me. I tried to think of something neutral. You coming from a party? I asked. Dance, she said. I smiled. At the ballroom? She didn't answer. I decided that was my cue to shut up. The radio hissed and found a song from the 70s tinny through the static. My phone buzzed with a text from my buddy Marco, another driver, asking if I'd pulled any airport runs. I didn't look. We passed the dark shape of the cemetery fence. That rose smell came back stronger. I checked my vents again, remembered I was being weird, put my hand back on the wheel. Do you want the west gate or here? She said, and her voice bounced around the car like she was closer than the back seat. Here is fine. There wasn't a here. We were alongside the fence, no gate, no driveway. I pulled over in the gravel by the shoulder and put my hazards on because that's what you do when a rider wants to step out mid-block. Do you want me to wait? I asked. It's late. She had one hand on the door handle. Her nails were bare, short. She looked at my eyes in the mirror and said, "Thank you." And I swear there was something else at the end of it, like she was going to say my name, except I hadn't told her my name. It made me feel like I'd missed a step on the stairs. She got out. The inside of the car puffed cold like someone opened a walk-in freezer. I watched her walk toward the fence. She didn't wobble, didn't look drunk. She didn't try to find a gate. She just kept walking until I had to lift my head off the headrest to keep her in the mirror. And then my rear window fogged over from the inside. Fast, like someone pressed their mouth against it and breathed. I wiped it with the back of my hand, laughing at myself. And when the glass cleared, the shoulder was empty. No white dress. No anyone. I waited. People change their minds. They realize they've left their phone on your seat. They come back to ask for a flashlight. I waited another minute, then hit end ride. The app spun for a long time. When it finally let me close it out, I smelled roses again. I checked the back seat to make sure she hadn't left anything. The spot where she'd sat was wet. Not a spill. Not a coffee ring. Damp like someone came in from the rain and never dried. When I pulled back into traffic, I felt stupid enough to talk out loud. "All right, Mary," I said, half joking. "Have a good night." My phone pinged. Marco again. "You near Archer?" I tapped the voice to text and said, "Yeah, just dropped one by the cemetery." "Super weird," he replied with a skull emoji and the word Mary and a bunch of laugh cry faces. I rolled my eyes and told him to save it for October. When I got home, my sister Elena was watching some dating show in my living room. She'd moved in for a month while her apartment got fumigated and had turned my place into a comfortable disaster of blankets and tea mugs. She looked up when I came in and wrinkled her nose. "What's that smell?" I smelled it too, stronger inside than it had been in the car. Roses, but like the air in a funeral parlor. Dense, sweet, a little sour. "I think someone left perfume on the seat," I said. I tossed my keys in the bowl by the door and looked at my fingers. The tips were white, like I'd handled dry ice. I rubbed them together to bring the color back. Elena pointed at the TV. "Come get traumatized by this proposal." I tried, but my thoughts kept running back over Archer like tires hitting the same pothole. Every time I blinked, I saw the white dress leaving my passenger door. Before bed, I checked my dash cam because that's what you do if you want to convince yourself nothing happened. The footage was clear up until the ballroom lot. The timestamp clicked 11:26, 11:27, and then the whole screen pixelated to gray like TV snow. It recovered 30 seconds later when I was pulling back into traffic. I told myself the card needed to be reformatted. The next morning, I went to my neighbor's unit to borrow a ladder. He's retired CPD, name's Dwyer, the kind of guy who grows tomatoes out of buckets and has opinions about everything. He handed me the ladder and then squinted at my car. "You get into a fender bender?" "No," I said, confused. "Why?" He ran his finger along the inside of my windshield, where I'd missed a patch the size of a hand when I wiped away the fog. "Print," he said, holding up his finger. It was damp. "You got a little one riding up front with you?" "No," I said again. And then, to cover how that made my back go hot, I said, "Just my sister sometimes." He looked at me like he could tell when I was lying. "Reformat your cards," he said, apropos of nothing. "Those dash cams are useless if you don't." I did. I popped the card, reformatted, set it back in. The rest of that week was normal. A drunk couple argued in my back seat about whether a pizza was technically a flat lasagna. Don't ask. A lady in scrubs fell asleep so hard I had to tap her shoulder at her stop. Every night when I got home, the apartment smelled faintly of roses for about an hour. Then it faded. Elena told me I was going nose-blind. I told myself I was noticing it because the first time had spooked me. Friday, the app dragged me south again. Archer after midnight is a different road. There's less traffic, and what you get is either teenagers in muscle cars or old guys in Buicks going 20 under the limit. It had rained early. The asphalt was lead dark and held the shape of taillights like it didn't want to let them go. The app chimed. Pickup, Archer and 63rd, passenger Mary. I stared at the screen long enough that a driver behind me honked. I told myself there are a lot of Marys, and this one just happened to be near the ballroom. I pulled into the same gravel shoulder without meaning to. My hazard lights clicked. I turned the radio down until it was just the faint hum of electricity. The chain-link fence glittered where it had trapped drops of water. I had the sudden, strong thought that if I looked at my backseat in the mirror, I would see her already there. I forced myself to turn my head like a normal person and look. Empty. I thumbed. I've arrived. The app spun. The smell of roses drifted into the car. It was fresh enough I looked for a florist's van. The app ticked 11:26, 11:27. I started my timer. I told myself I would wait 3 minutes and then cancel. At 2 minutes and 50 seconds, the back door opened. She got in like someone trying not to wake a sleeping person. White dress. Bare hands. Pale hair with a dark pin to hold it off her face. She sat in the same spot and folded her hands in the same way. I felt my mouth pull into a smile. Reflex more than anything else. Hey, I said, and realized I'd made it too warm, like I was greeting a friend. Where to? Home, she said, and the second beat again, on Archer. Near the cemetery? She didn't answer, but I felt her leaning forward very slightly as if to see the road. I put the car in gear. Okay, I said. We drove in silence. The wipers squeaked. Each streetlight we passed threw a white bar across the dash and then let it fall. The cold seeped out of the back seat and made my fingers ache on the wheel. I kept checking the mirror and catching her eyes for an instant, not long enough to see their color. She didn't blink much. She breathed shallow, like someone who'd been crying and was trying not to start again. I have a younger sister. There's a protective switch in my brain for a girl that age trying not to cry. I battled the urge to ask if she was okay. We reached the long run of fence. I waited for her to say here. She didn't. We went past the west gate, the median turnarounds, the little cross streets. The app still hadn't loaded a destination. I was about to ask again when she said, "Do you know where the ballroom went?" I glanced back more than I should have while driving. It burned, I said. Years ago. She tilted her head like she was testing that word. Oh, she said. I liked it. We passed a patch of road where the asphalt kept a smell of wet leaves stronger than any tree nearby. I felt my throat close around the words I wanted to say, which were something like, "You want me to take you somewhere else? Somewhere with people?" But when I opened my mouth, what came out was, "Cold tonight." She nodded. "I'm not cold," she said. It was a normal sentence. It didn't feel normal in the car. She said, "Here." 2 miles later, near a break in the fence I'd never noticed. Not a gate, not a road. Just a place where the chain links had been cut once and repaired. Newer metal woven shut. There was a little drift of dead leaves against it, though the wind had been pushing the other way. I pulled over. I don't know why I did. You don't drop people on the shoulder. It's against the rules. The hazard lights clicked like a heartbeat. Once, twice. She put her hand on the door handle and then stopped. "What's your name?" she asked. I almost gave her my real name. That is so stupid it embarrasses me to write it. I said the one I use for customers, which is my middle name. "Daniel," I said. "Most people call me Dan." "Thank you, Dan," she said. Like the first night, my name had a second sound stuck to it. The ghost of a syllable, like she was starting to say something else and changed her mind. She got out. The car filled with cold. My eyes watered. I wiped them with the heel of my hand, and when I looked back, she was gone. The next day at the copy shop, I told Marco about it. He's the kind of guy who collects stories the way other people collect baseball cards. He said, "You met Mary," like he was proud of me. Resurrection Mary, Archer Mary, every cabbie's got a version. I told him I didn't pick up a ghost. I picked up a real person. I described her dress and her shoes and the way she didn't seem cold. The way the dash cam glitched at the ballroom both nights. He laughed and said, "Dude, if she's ghosting your footage, she's going to ghost your arguments too." I told Elena that night, mostly because she asked why my hoodie was still in the car. Even though the forecast had turned cruel, she listened without interrupting and then said, "You don't have to pick her up again, you know, even if she's a person. You can say no." I said I knew. I said I wasn't looking for her. But when Friday rolled around, I found myself driving Archer earlier than usual, watching the fence in my peripheral vision like I was waiting for a deer to bolt. The app chimed, "Pick up at 63rd. Passenger Mary." I almost ignored it. I told myself I could swipe decline and someone else would get the ping. My thumb hovered, and then the weather did one of those quick, dirty switch-ups. Wind gusted out of nowhere and rattled the car, and the sky went 2 shades darker and rain started that wasn't on any radar. It felt like the decision was made for me, and I didn't want to say even to myself that I'd been too scared to take the ride. I pulled into the gravel. The chain link sang in the wind. I know that's not a thing chains do, but that's what it sounded like. The app ticked 11:26, 11:27. The back door opened without me hearing a single footstep. She got in, dressed damp at the hem like she'd walked through wet grass. Her hair was smooth and dry. She folded her hands. "Mary," I said, and then stopped because I'd said it like I knew her. "Home," she said. "On Archer," I said. We drove. The rain tightened into a neat, mean curtain. I hit the wipers to the fastest setting and it still felt like I was peering through a shower. We passed the west gate. A squad car idled there, lights off. I considered flagging it down, saying I had a passenger who needed help. The thought made my skin prickle, like the reach of my hand would hit a wall of cold air, so I kept going. "Does anyone know you're out?" I asked. "Do you want me to call someone for you? A friend, a parent?" She took a breath like she wanted to say a lot and ended up saying nothing. I saw the movement of her throat. She said finally, "He didn't come." "You got stood up?" I asked. Relief running through me because it was a normal explanation and I could work with normal. "That sucks. I can take you anywhere you want. There's a Denny's open on Harlem. We can—" I was dancing, she said, like a child defending a plan. "I thought he would come. Tonight?" I asked, and I didn't mean to put that question mark on the end like I was saying the real word under it. "When?" She didn't answer. The smell of roses was strong enough to make my stomach turn. I cracked my window and the wind shouldered in, wet and immediate, and the smell stayed. We reached the break in the fence and she said, "Here." And this time I didn't pull over. I don't know why. Maybe I thought if I got her to a better lit spot she would say something real, something I could help with. Maybe I thought the squad car was still behind us and I could wave it down. She leaned forward very slightly. "Here," she said again, not urgent, just firm. "I'll turn around," I said. "It's safer." The rear view showed me her eyes at last. They reflected the dashlight in a way that made them look pale. "It's safer here," she said. "And if you've ever heard a person say something simple in a voice that closes the door on any argument, you'll know the tone." I pulled over. She made to open the door and then paused and put one hand on the back of my seat. Her fingers were narrow and cold through the fabric. She said, "You're kind." Like she was giving me an evaluation I might one day need to show to someone, and I said, "Wait." I didn't know what I was going to ask her. It came out as, "What's your last name?" She smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes, and then she leaned closer. So close I could feel the cold of her on my ear. She whispered something. At first I thought it was my last name, and I froze because that would have meant another sort of story. Then I realized she'd said a street. Not Archer. A name I didn't recognize. Something like Harlem and Hale combined. And then she was out the door and the car breathed in and the window fogged. I got out. I don't know what came over me. I'm not the kind of person who runs headlong into the sort of problem that becomes a headline. But I ran to the fence. My shoes sank into the soft shoulder. Rain pasted my hair to my head. The chain link was slick and cold. I shone my phone light through the links. The cemetery was gray on gray. The near ground was a tangle of weeds. No footprints. No white dress between the stones. I stood there long enough to feel stupid. When I got home, Elena was asleep. I locked the door softly and then stood in my kitchen listening to the refrigerator hum. My phone buzzed. A voicemail transcribed itself into a mistake. Dan Her, home. From a number with no area code, no digits, just a string of question marks. I listened to it. Static. A breath at the end like someone opening their mouth to say wait and not getting it out in time. I typed the street she'd whispered into Google. There was no exact match. There was a Hale Avenue in Bridgeview and a Harlem, obviously, but nothing that felt right. I thought about the ballroom again. When you're tired, you draw lines between things that don't connect. I told myself I would sleep and this would be funny in the morning and I would tell Marco, and he'd roll his eyes so hard he'd hurt something. I woke to my phone ringing. The ring that means a human is calling, not a spam filter. My dashcam app. It has one of those motion alerts that I always forget to disable. It had pushed a notification at 4 in the morning. Movement detected. I clicked it, queasy, and it showed me a black video with a timestamp in the corner. For 8 seconds, nothing. Then the inside of my car lit dimly like a door had been opened somewhere else. On the rear seat, the fabric darkened in a handprint, fingers splayed, pressing down. The weight of it changed the cushion. I watched the outline of the fingertips halo with moisture. And then nothing. I scrubbed back and forth like maybe the answer was between frames. I didn't tell anyone about that part. What I did next was the rational thing. I thought of Mr. Dwyer with his tomatoes, and I thought about talking to someone who didn't collect ghost stories for fun. I walked down the hall and knocked. He opened in a t-shirt that said "Polka Never Dies," which felt like a cosmic joke. I said, "Can you come look at something?" He did. I showed him the dashcam clip. He didn't say anything until it ended. Then he said, "Kids, like that explained all physics. You probably left the window open and some neighborhood kid thought he was hilarious." "It's sealed," I said, "and the door's alarm never triggered." I realized how defensive that sounded. He shrugged. "You want to report a trespass, we can call it in. But you know what they'll do. They'll make a note. They won't swab your seat." I didn't call. I aired the car out until it lost the funeral parlor scent. I took shorter runs close to home. A week passed and then 2.
Halloween came and went.
Marco texted me every time he drove past the cemetery. "Anything?" He'd ask. "Your girlfriend walk home?" I told him to shove it. Then my sister moved back to her place. The apartment got too quiet. I slept with the TV on low old sitcoms, seasoning the dark with canned laughter. One night around midnight, I woke up to the TV paused and the smell of roses thick enough to taste. The remote was on the coffee table where I'd left it. The windows were shut. My mouth went dry. I stood up and my bare feet met cold like I'd stepped into a puddle. The floor was dry. The cold was concentrated, a patch the size of a doormat in front of the door. I opened the door and the hallway beyond was ordinary, the normal smells of old paint and someone else's cooking. When I shut the door again, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Are you coming?" There was no callback option, no info, just that sentence and the timestamp and the sense that if I replied, whatever I wrote would end up somewhere I didn't want it. I didn't sleep after that. In the morning, after watching the clock march to 7, I drove Archer in daylight like I was trying to see a stage with the lights on. The fence looked normal, the gate looked like iron should, and the lot where the ballroom had been looked too small to hold all the pictures people keep in their heads about it. I pulled over anyway. I got out. Cars hissed by. A city truck went past with its radio loud enough I could hear the DJ. There was a woman at the bus stop in a blue coat, and 2 teenage boys laughing at something on a phone. It felt like I'd imagined everything, but when I opened my back door, the seat had a faint, perfect handprint on it, as if whoever had been there had gotten up 10 minutes before and I had just missed them. I scrubbed it with upholstery cleaner until my knuckles went numb. The print lightened. It didn't go away. A few nights later, Elena came over for dinner like we'd said she would. I made pasta. She brought garlic bread. We did the whole normal script. After, she said, casual, "Have you been back out there?" "Where?" I asked like I didn't know. She tilted her head at me. "You know where," I said, "No." Then I said, "Yes." Then I said, "I don't think I get a vote." She nodded. "Let me come. If you're going to go, don't do it alone. You believe me?" I asked at the same time as wanting her not to. "I don't not believe you," she said. "But either way, you shouldn't be alone out there at midnight." Marco invited himself when he heard. Of course he did. He brought a flashlight the size of a baton and a bag of gas station donuts and treated it like a tailgate. I hated him a little for making me feel braver. We drove Archer with the windows cracked and the radio off. The night was clear, cold enough to make people pull their coats tight and walk fast. When we passed the west gate, the squad car was back, an officer inside half lit by the screen glow. the shape of him familiar in any city in America. We parked in the gravel. I turned my hazards on. The clicking sound was too loud in the quiet. Elena put her hand over mine and said, "Breathe." Marco said, "If we see her, I'm asking what year it is." I told him to shut up. We waited. 11:26, 11:27. The app was open and empty. I tried to imagine how this would look if nothing happened. The three of us in a car facing a fence, idiots by any measure. A semi went by and rolled the air over us. The smell hit then like someone had opened a door in the car, dense and heavy and sweet. Elena's fingers tightened on mine. "Okay," she said. "I smell it." Marco stopped chewing. He put his donut down carefully like he didn't want to spook any wildlife. "Well," he whispered as if we were in church. The back door opened. We all turned in the same motion. She was there. And for one weird, ordinary second I was ashamed of having an audience for her, like I'd brought friends to watch someone cry. She sat down on the right, folded her hands. Her dress was dry even though the ground outside was wet. Elena slowly let go of my hand and said very gently, "Hi." Mary didn't look at her. She looked at me. "Home," she said. "On Archer," I said, like the world was a track we were locked into. We drove. Nobody spoke. Marco angled his giant flashlight in his lap like he wasn't sure if using it would be rude. Elena watched the mirror and then stared down at her shoes like she was unseeing on purpose. The temperature dropped until my breath fogged in the car. The rear window hazed. I ran the defroster. It struggled. We reached the break in the fence. I pulled over. The hazards clicked. Once, twice, then went out. The car was still on. The dashboard lights were bright. The hazards just stopped. I thumbed the switch. Nothing. I said too bright, "It's fine." Elena said, "It's fine." Marco didn't say anything. Mary leaned forward, not far, just enough to tilt the balance of the car. She rested her hand on the back of my seat again. I felt the cold through the fabric, through my jacket, in a bone-deep way that made my teeth ache. She said, "Thank you, Dan," the second syllable of my name almost something else again. And I panicked at the idea that she knew something about me I didn't know about myself. I heard myself say, "What's your last name?" Like a stuck record, she leaned in the way you lean in when a person is hard of hearing. She whispered the same sound she'd whispered before, street or name or nothing, and then she got out. The car breathed. The smell of roses dropped into the footwells like fog. The rear window ran with condensation from the inside down. Marco moved first. He shoved his giant flashlight into my hands like a relay baton and said, "Stay," to Elena without looking at her, and he got out and rounded the trunk. He's someone who runs toward fights. He thinks it's a virtue. I got out after him, because I couldn't let him be the only one. The air hit me like the inside of a freezer. The fence hummed with wind. My breath came in little ghosts. The flashlight beam cut into weeds and lichen in the dull silver of chain. There was no white dress on the other side. There was a shape of shadow that might have been a tree, and then that was the end of it. I said, "Mary," and felt stupid. Marco said, "Miss," like a cop, Elena's voice from the car. "Guys." Calm, not a panic voice. I turned. She was staring at the back seat through the open door. I walked back. On the vinyl, a handprint bloomed. Not one hand. Two side by side, palms in, fingers long, and between them a small smear like someone had rested their forehead and slid down. Marco said almost kindly, "Nope," like he was telling a kid they couldn't go to the park because it was raining. He got back in. He didn't slam the door. I sat down. Elena shut her eyes and put her hand on my arm. I put the car in drive. When we pulled away from the shoulder, the hazard lights came back on for a second, all on their own, and then off again. The radio, which had been dead quiet, caught half a song from a station that doesn't exist and then lost it. We drove. Nobody spoke until we were past the west gate and the squad car. Then Elena said evenly, "Take me home," and I did. I expected the smell to fade as soon as we left Archer. It didn't. It hung in the car, less funeral parlor, more garden after rain. Marco bailed at the first light where bailing didn't look like running. He said, "You'll text me when you're home," like a command. Elena came up to my apartment because that's what you do when someone has shifted your idea of what happens in your town at night. We sat on the couch with the TV off like people after a wake. She said finally, "What if you stop?" Like the idea had just arrived and she was passing it along. "What if you stop picking her up?" I don't request her, I said. She requests me. You can decline, she said. I know, I said, and meant I knew the button existed, not that I could press it. Marco texted to say he was home. He included a picture of his front door like proof. I typed good and then deleted it and typed okay and hated how small it looked. Elena dozed against my shoulder and woke with a start, the way people do when they've been trying not to. Around 3, when the world is quiet enough to hear your upstairs neighbor roll over, my phone buzzed again. A voicemail, no number. The transcript was garbled. By gate come? I almost didn't listen to it. Then I did, static, a breath, and under the noise, that word again. The street that isn't on any map I can find, spoken like someone practicing the way a name feels in the mouth. That was 3 months ago. On some nights the app is quiet and I tell myself it's done. On others the ping comes at 11:26, 11:27 and I pull over in the gravel without thinking about not doing it. I have said I will stop. I have meant it. I have driven Archer in daylight like that will make it not a problem. I have talked to Mr. Dwyer, who offered to call in a patrol car to sit behind me like a chaperone. I have driven with Elena in the passenger seat and with Marco, who keeps giving me a rosary he then forgets he gave me and asks for back. It doesn't change the part where she gets in and asks to go home and puts her hand on the back of my seat, with a cold that aches, and thanks me like we've done something helpful. The handprint on the back seat never fully wiped away. It's a shade darker, a watermark of 5 separate ovals, like a post-it you took off but the adhesive halo stuck. Sometimes in my apartment the smell shows up for an hour and then leaves. Once I woke up because the air by my face was cold, very specifically cold, and I lay there convinced that if I opened my eyes somebody would be bending to see if I was awake. I didn't open them. I don't know what the rules are if you do. I've started saying a name at the curb when she gets out. Not Mary, she never gave me a last name to go with it. The other thing, the not quite street. I say it just under my breath. Sometimes the radio catches a station long enough to echo the vowel back to me. Sometimes it doesn't. Once I thought I heard someone on the other side of the fence say, with relief and something that wasn't relief all the way down, yes. Elena says that if I keep telling this, people will say I wanted it to happen to me. Marco says I should change cars and numbers and never go south again. Mr. Dwyer shakes his head and says, some roads are sticky. If you drive Archer late, and you see a car on the shoulder with its hazards pulsing just once, then going stubbornly dark, and you smell roses where there aren't any, keep going. Or pull over if you're like me and you can't stand the idea of someone standing outside a fence in the cold and asking if the ballroom is still there and where home is now. I can't tell you which one is the right thing. I can only tell you that last night I heard a third voice in the car when I said that, not quite street, something like a laugh or a sob behind me. And when I got home and shut off the engine, the hazard lights blinked once, soft as a breath, like someone was saying thank you. Or like someone was reminding me we still hadn't reached the right place. I sat there with my hands on the wheel until the smell faded, and then I went upstairs and the apartment was just an apartment and my bed was just a bed. But the spot by the door was cold for a long time, and I stood in it without moving, like if I didn't, someone else would. I never thought I'd put this into words, but my hands still shake when I think about it, and I'm hoping that writing it down will make the nights quieter. If you're from New Orleans, you've probably heard some version of this story already, and you'll decide whether I just bought into the tourist myth, or if something from that place decided to buy into me. Either way, I'm not trying to convince anyone. I just want to sleep. I was in the city to visit my older sister, Nora. She'd moved down after grad school and stayed, as people do when beignets and brass bands and sticky heat somehow get into the seams of their life. I had a few extra vacation days and a cheap flight. She lived in a narrow shotgun rental not far from the Treme, the kind of place that had a front porch with peeling blue paint and a bead strand tangled in the railing from Mardi Gras 2 years back. Her neighbor across the street, an older woman in a floral robe who introduced herself as Ms. Broussard, sat out most mornings with a spritzing bottle to water a potted rosemary bush and call out local gossip like it was community radio. "You two going to St. Louis today?" she asked on my first morning, her voice carrying through the warm air like a clarinet. "They changed the tour times again." "Always changing." "We were thinking about it," Nora said. "If my brother doesn't melt first." "It's not the heat," I said. "It's my northern blood. It's confused." Nora snorted and flicked the porch fan to its highest setting. It wobbled and hummed, pushing humid air around. She pressed a condensation-dripping glass of sweet tea into my hand, little ice cubes clinking. "We'll stop for iced coffee on the way. You can pretend it's winter." St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 is one of those places always on lists, and Nora had a co-worker named Devin who'd been nagging her to finally go with him. He met us by the iron gates at noon, tall and polite and wearing a saint's cap. He'd grown up in Cemeteries and had the easy way with everyone that I envied in locals. He introduced us to our guide, a woman called Lonnie with a laminated badge, sunburned shoulders, and a bottle of spray sunscreen clipped to her bag, then fell into step at the back like he knew all the beats already. "It's not like the movies," Lonnie said cheerfully as she let us in. "No fog machines, no thunder cues. But don't wander off, please. These are family plots. We're visitors. If you haven't been, the cemetery parts the city like a white river. Above-ground tombs crowd together. Plastered walls and marble plaques, names in French and English, little ceramic portraits under cloudy glass. It smells like old stone and warm dust with a faint sweetness from wilted flowers. You can hear the city beyond the walls. The drone of traffic, a bus brake sighing, the ding of a streetcar bell, as if the everyday presses its face to the bars and peers in. The light was hard and hot. Every edge glared. The tour followed a sensible path. Lonnie pointed out the kinds of things you can read online. Why the tombs are above ground, how families reuse them, the history of certain names, the way the water rises when it rains. I wanted to lean on every slab. I wanted to drink the shade like water. Devin kept his hat low and stayed at Nora's shoulder. Every so often he'd lean in to add a story that sounded made up, then shrug when I laughed. Like anything might be true here if it wanted to be. We saw her near a narrow corridor between tombs, where the shade fell in a stripe on the baked ground. A woman in a black dress knelt at a low grave, her shoulders bent, the veil covering her head and falling to her elbows like a fog. She had lace gloves, delicate and out of time. And in the heat, I thought about how awful it must be to wear that outfit in August. She was crying, but it was a particular kind of crying. Quiet, controlled, the way you do at a funeral when you don't want to make it about you. The sound drifted over the stone, soft and damp. "Private, private," Lonnie whispered automatically, her cheerful voice turned down a notch. She steered us to the left, away from the corridor. "We give folks space. Is everyone keeping up?" I glanced back. The woman didn't move. The lace of her gloves was gray with dust at the fingertips. I told myself she was a local burying someone recent. But the grave she knelt before was clearly old. Moss along its base, a name from the 1800s flaking from the plaster. The bouquet at the foot looked new, though. White roses, bound tight with a ribbon that almost matched the lace. We kept moving because that's what you do when you're part of a group and someone in charge has decided the next point of interest is over there. But the sound of her crying didn't quite fall behind. I could still hear it under Lonnie's voice, a soft waver that pulled at the threads of my attention, even when I tried to look at a particular inscription, or listen to the story about the architect who'd designed a pyramid tomb for himself. The more I tried to ignore it, the more it felt like it was in my ear, personal. By the time we were near the back wall, where a narrow door barred with a rusted chain faced a row of family vaults, I realized the crying had been following us. Or I'd been following it. "Please stay together," Lonnie called. She clapped her hands once. "No shortcuts. I know they look like mazes, but if you don't know them, you'll twist yourself up." That's when we heard the wail. It came from somewhere to our right, a sound stretched so thin it was barely a sound, like steam escaping. It wasn't the woman's quiet crying. This was bigger and thinner all at once, like wind through a broken bottle. Everyone stopped. Even Lonnie stood still and wet her lips, eyes on the rose. The heat leaned on us. A streetcar bell rang from the other side of the wall, civilized and neat, and it sounded like a joke in the face of that noise. "What is that?" a guy in a tourist visor asked. His camera made a little electronic click when he lowered it. "Sometimes the wind," Lonnie said too quickly. "Sometimes just echoes. It's an old place." She recovered her rhythm. She turned her shoulders back toward us. "We're almost done. Take any last photos. No climbing, no rubbing names," she said, as if reciting rules could rope the wildness back. On the way out, we passed the corridor again. The woman in the veil was gone. The roses were wilting already in the heat, petals folding in. There was a smudge of gray on the edge of the grave, like a handprint that had rested there and then pulled away. Outside the gate, the air felt bigger, the light less sharp. I breathed like I'd been under a blanket. Nora slipped her sunglasses on and bumped my shoulder. "You good?" "Fine," I said. "Just hot." "Devin," she asked, "do you think that was some kind of plant? You know, like they hire a mourner?" "I've never seen her," he said, and he looked like he meant it, like he wished he had something tidier and funnier to offer. "But people talk. My uncle said there's a woman who does laps in the place, always in black." "Could have been her, that noise?" I asked. "The whale?" "Could have been a train," he said, though we all knew the train sound didn't bleed like that through your ribs. We went for iced coffee at a shop where a fan moved the air around like soup. The barista had a small tattoo of a fleur-de-lis on the back of her hand, and rings that clicked against the register as she counted change. I tried to shake it, the thing in my head, the sound. I reminded myself of planes and hotel TVs and how travel makes your brain hold on to details it would otherwise forget. We walked back along a block where someone had painted a porch bright purple, and a cat watched us from the steps like we were auditioning for its approval. At Nora's house, the screen door stuck like always, and I had to put my shoulder into it. Inside smelled like lemon cleaner and the faint wet nap scent of humidity that never quite leaves. The ceiling fan clicked with each rotation. I noticed the first thing that night around 11. Nora had gone to bed. She had an early shift in the morning. Devin left after we split a plate of leftover red beans and rice and watched a rerun of a cooking show where the host said "y'all" in a way that made Nora cackle. I stretched out on the pullout in the front room with a ratty blanket over my legs and my phone dimmed low. The streetlight leaked in through the shears and the neighbor's dog barked twice like it was checking if the world still worked. At first I thought it was a sink drip, a soft regular sound, but when I got up and padded barefoot to the kitchen, the faucet was dry. I stood there for a moment listening. The sound came again. Not a drip, a breath, not from the kitchen, from the front room. I switched off the cheap wall clock so I wouldn't mistake the tick again. The breath came once more, soft, a catch on the end. So small and so close I felt ridiculous for standing there like a kid who has just turned out the light and seen an impossible shape in the pile of clothes on a chair. I went back to bed and pulled the blanket to my chest. The breath came again. I told myself it was the house. This was an old place. Capillaries and lungs, wood settling, air squeezing through the seams. The sound was so thin it could have been the street through the glass. I scrolled through my phone until my eyes blurred, then fell asleep with the first line of a text half-typed to Nora about a leak she didn't have. In the morning, there was a damp smear on the floorboards near the front door, the kind you get when someone has walked in from the rain, except it hadn't rained and the front mat was dry. The smear was small, oval, a mark as if someone had knelt there, leaned a weight into it, and then stood. It smelled faintly of something sweet, like crushed flowers in the heat. I bent close. The wood had swelled a little, nothing dramatic, just a weathering the house would have done anyway with a change in humidity. The smell made me swallow. Nora was tying her hair up by the bathroom mirror. I told her I'd mop it. She nodded, distracted, then paused to look at me in the glass. "You okay? You look like you had dreams." "Just too much sugar," I said. "That sweet tea is a weapon." "You'll acclimate by the time you go home," she said, smiling, and then she was out the door with a wave and the squeak of the screen. I mopped the oval mark. It disappeared easily, but the smell got stronger with the water. I opened a window and turned on the fan and rolled my eyes at myself. It was nothing. I texted Devin, asked if he'd ever seen anything weird in St. Louis besides tourists climbing where they shouldn't. He sent back a grave emoji and then a shrug. "People leave offerings," he wrote. "Sometimes they leave more than that." I had promised Nora I'd be good and explore while she worked. I walked the quarter. I watched a brass trio on the corner, sunlight in their bells like liquid. I ate something fried and powdered and made a mess of my shirt. I took photos and then deleted them because none of them looked like how the place felt. I kept turning my head for a sound that wasn't there. I stopped at a used bookstore that smelled like dust and coffee. The owner asleep in a chair with a small fan pointed directly at his face. In the section with local history, there were pamphlets and self-printed booklets. A stapled one on hauntings in the city had a paragraph about a weeping woman at St. Louis Cemetery No. 1. Witnesses report a figure in a veil who remains fixed by certain family tombs, it said, and who has been seen near the entrance. Avoid direct engagement. Do not offer sympathy. I laughed out loud in the quiet store, the kind of brittle laugh you do when something taps your nerves. The owner stirred without opening his eyes and said, "Cash only." That night we had thunder. It came in late, like it had decided to take a personal day and then changed its mind. The first drops on the porch roof sounded like a handful of rice thrown at a wedding. Nora texted from her room to ask if I wanted a movie. We cued a corny old horror flick, the kind with obvious sets and too much fog. A crack of lightning flickered through our movie lighting and made everything on the screen look fake. Between scenes I heard that thin breath again. I muted the TV. Rain ticked against the window. Nora shifted on the couch. The breath came again, slightly longer, like someone trying not to speak. "Do you hear that?" I asked. Nora watched me in the TV glow. "What?" I unmuted the movie. "Nothing." Around midnight, the power hiccuped. The fan stopped mid-turn. The sound of the rain filled the house in all the places electricity usually lives. In that quiet, cradled by thunder, the breath came again, right by the front door, followed by the tiniest choke, like someone trying not to sob. I sat up. Nora did too, hair a dark rope over her shoulder. "Okay," she said, decisive, as if we'd both been waiting for a cue. She stood and crossed to the door. She turned the lock and chain and opened it onto the porch. Rain draped in sheets past the overhang. The street was slick, the puddles gold with the streetlight. Ms. Broussard's porch was empty, her rosemary bush glistening. The neighbor's dog barked twice and then stopped. "Hello?" Nora called. Softness layered over the word like she could make it land gently. Rain. Heat. The feeling that something stood just beyond where the porch light ended. I stepped beside her and looked down. On the threshold there was the faintest dark oval like the one from the morning. Even in the rain, the air smelled sweet. We both closed the door at the same time because it felt wrong to stand with it open any longer. The chain slid into place with a small, precise clink. We didn't say anything about it. We turned the fan back on when the power returned and watched the end of the movie as if rain and electricity could make a fence between us and a feeling. The next day I told Devin I expected him to roll his eyes and say a polite version of "you're spooked." Instead, he got that careful look people get when they realize you've stepped into their personal map of the city. "There's a caretaker," he said. "An older guy, Auguste. He's not official, but he knows everything. He plays checkers outside a corner store on Claiborne. If you're really worried, I can ask him to talk to you. He'll probably laugh, but he might tell you to put salt by the door or some other thing that makes your brain feel like you've done something." "I'll try anything," I said, surprising myself with the seriousness in my voice. "But I don't want to make fun of it. I just want it to stop." We found Auguste at the store that afternoon exactly as promised, a man with a face mapped by years and the posture of someone who had lifted more weight than you would guess. His checker opponent, a teenager with a plastic bag of chips, gave up his seat without being asked. Auguste listened while I told the short version. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He waited until the end, until I had described the breath, the sound like a thread pulled through the air, the damp ovals on the floor, the smell. "You offered her your ear," he said finally, like it was a diagnosis. "I didn't talk to her," I said. We kept moving. I didn't even look straight at her. "Not really." "You offered your ear," he repeated, tapping his own gently. "Some folks offer their eyes. Some offer their mouths." He looked at my hands. You listened. You heard her and you kept hearing her. She knows the door that opens easiest." "What do I do?" I asked. He shrugged, but not unkindly. "Close your ears," he said. "Fill your house with noise. Talk to your sister. Laugh too loud. Put pots on the stove, let them boil. Pretend you don't hear. The city is a chorus. A single voice can't cut through if you don't make it. If you invite it, it will keep coming. You have to be boring." "Boring," Devin repeated, half smiling. "Boring is safe," Auguste said. "People don't come to New Orleans to be safe." He pushed a checker across the board with a soft click. "Don't leave water by the door. Don't leave mirrors uncovered at night. Don't keep flowers after they droop. If she doesn't get what she wants, she'll go kneel where she belongs. And you'll forget you ever hurt her." "What does she want?" I asked. "Some folks are a question with no answer," he said. "They ask and ask. You can't answer for them. You can only stop listening." We thanked him and left. Devin looked relieved, like a doctor had prescribed rest. Nora laughed in the car and said, "Imagine if we have to hold a party every night just to drown out a ghost." We tried. That evening, we cooked with the radio turned to a station where the DJ told long, funny stories between songs. We left the fan humming, the TV on low with a cooking show, my phone playing loops of city noise. We kept up a polite racket. The house felt full and ordinary. I felt foolish for having felt anything else. Then, around 2 in the morning, I woke because the house was too quiet. The fan hummed. The TV showed a screensaver of drifting shapes. The radio pulsed faintly from the kitchen. But beneath all of it, pressed like a leaf between pages, was the breath. Thin, careful, right by the door. I lay very still. The streetlight washed the room in a pale orange that felt like old paper. The breath came again, a soft sound like the hitch after you've been crying a while and your body has learned a rhythm for grief. It felt less like it was in the room and more like it was inside my head now, pressed up against the space behind my ear. I turned my face into the pillow as if that would block it. Something tapped the glass of the window very lightly, a sound like a fingernail. Tap, tap, tap. I got up because I couldn't not. I took my phone with me, the flashlight a thin blade. The lace glove detail I'd noticed came back to me in a flash. The tapping had that delicate intention. I told myself it was a branch, the wind, a neighbor, the kind of answers you stack like sandbags. I stepped into the front room and froze. Someone was standing on the porch just beyond the shears, a dark shape, not looming, not cartoonish, simply there in the way someone is when they don't know if they should knock again. The tapping came once more. I couldn't tell if it was the glass or the wood. The figure didn't move. The streetlight bleached the lace of the curtain into obscurity. I could see the curve of a shoulder, the idea of a head tilted down. The smell of crushed flowers slipped under the door and touched the back of my tongue. "Go home," I said very softly, the way you talk to a stray dog you don't want to spook or feed. "Please." The figure tilted as if listening. "Go home," I said again. I remembered Augusta's instructions and realized how ridiculous I'd been, how my whisper was the opposite of boring. I reached for the volume of the TV and turned it up too loud, a bright voice filling the room with talk of butter. I flicked on the kitchen light. I opened the fridge and shut it. I ran the tap. Noise bloomed like a childish prayer. The tapping stopped. The breath didn't. It moved from the door to the wall to the ceiling like water in pipes. It threaded the fan's hum until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I went to the door, my palm on the cold brass, and simply stood there, breathing with it, matching it, hoping to exhaust it by giving it nowhere to sit. Eventually, the breath faded. Or I stopped hearing it. Dawn came as a paler smear. The rain gone, the street cleaned. When we opened the door, there was another damp oval on the threshold. The smell was stronger than ever. Ms. Broussard's rosemary had tiny beads of water on it that caught the light like glass. That afternoon, a police cruiser idled on the block. An officer knocked on Ms. Broussard's door, then ours. Officer Landry, his name said. And he had the kind of patient expression people wear when they're tired of their own authority. He said there had been reports of a woman in black walking late at night along the cemetery wall, all the way to this block, not bothering anyone but upsetting some newer residents. He asked if we'd seen anything. He wrote notes when we said no and then gave us his card anyway. "Old city," he said, half embarrassed by the vagueness of it. "Sounds scary." That night, Nora set a small dish of salt by the door despite Augusta's warning not to leave water and not to indulge. "It's not water," she said, trying to keep it light. "It'll make me feel better." She covered the mirror in the hallway with an old scarf, even though we needed it to check hair before leaving. She tied the scarf into a knot very firmly, like a spell in a fairy tale. The dish of salt was damp in the morning, not spilled, just damp around the edges like a finger had touched it and trailed along. The scarf in the hallway hung askew, though the knot held. The mirror behind it was fogged as if someone had breathed very close. And when I looked, a tiny crescent cleared where my face huffed it more. Inside reflecting outside. I went back to St. Louis Cemetery by myself because I'm the kind of person who reads the instructions on the medicine bottle 3 times, even when it's just ibuprofen. The gate was open for tours. I paid another fee because the sign asked me to. I followed a cluster of people through the white brightness. As in any maze, when you return, you discover you've misremembered every corner. I found the corridor with the stripe of shade, the grave with the roses, now brown and collapsed as if the heat had sucked them inside out. There were marks on the tomb like smudged fingerprints. The air was still and loud with cicadas. I didn't see the woman, but I felt watched by something that wasn't unkind and wasn't kind either, something that wanted and didn't know what. I stood in the shade and made my breathing small. When the group moved on, I followed. I stayed close to their sound like a swimmer stays near a buoy. On my last night in the city, after Nora's shift and a simple dinner and a repeated joke, the house felt normal. The fan clicked. The TV murmured. The radio sang a song I didn't know. We were almost done pretending to ignore it because pretending had eaten the point of my visit, which was to sit with my sister and do nothing in her house. We turned the volume down so we could hear each other. We let the quiet grow a little. The breath came like an apology. It was so soft that if you hadn't been trained, you wouldn't have noticed. It came from near the back door this time, like someone had circled the house. It carried that weary hitch. I looked at Nora. She swallowed and nodded like we were looking at a clock. "Do you want me to—" she began. "No," I said. Not because I was brave, because I was so tired of hearing anything but her. We talked about work. We talked about Ms. Broussard's rosemary and how ours always died. We talked about Devon's terrible taste in hats. We talked and talked until we were laughing at the smallest things people say when they're keeping each other awake. The breath thinned. The damp smell receded. At some point I realized the noise outside wasn't rain or a train, but the pure ordinary buzz of a quiet city night. I fell asleep early for once, and I dreamed about a subway platform that looked like a row of tombs. In the morning, my suitcase stood by the door where I'd left it, wheels touching the threshold. There was a single damp mark the size of a palm next to it that had not been there when I fell asleep. The smell was as faint as memory. At the airport, while I waited at my gate, a woman across from me pulled a handkerchief from her bag to dab her eyes. It was lace. My heart punched me hard and then eased when I saw it clearly. Just lace, not old, not elaborate, not a veil. She smiled at me, embarrassed about her tears, and I smiled back. And both smiles were reasonable human artifacts. Back home, the first night was too quiet in a different way. My apartment doesn't have a porch. It has radiators that clank and a neighbor who practices guitar and a view of a brick wall. I put on the fan and opened a window and felt silly for checking the floor for marks. It was late and it was cool, and I slept a real sleep full of dull bureaucratic dreams about missing forms. I've been home for months. Nothing dramatic has happened. I don't see a woman in black waiting in reflections. There are no strange footprints or dripping faucets or sudden scents of flowers. The most supernatural thing about my life is that my plant hasn't died. I go to work. I come home. I eat the same 3 things for dinner in rotation. But some nights, usually when it's about to rain, my apartment gets a particular weight to it. The air presses. The hum of the refrigerator sounds too much like breathing. If I turn the fan off, the quiet is not empty. I'll be pouring pasta into a bowl or standing by the window waiting for the kettle, or scrolling through my sister's texts about a new bakery near her house. And I'll hear it just for a second, so faint I have to unclench my jaw to catch it. A thin intake of air, a soft catch at the end like a habit learned long ago and hard to break. When it comes, I do what Auguste told me. I fill the room with harmless noise. I call my sister and leave my laugh on her voicemail when she can't pick up. I drop a spoon on purpose. I put music on low and badly sing along. I talk to myself like a fool and tell the empty apartment what tomorrow's weather will be, and where I've left my keys and what time the bus comes. Sometimes it fades. Sometimes I hear it again just once as if to let me know it's still asking, and then it stops. I haven't done anything dangerous, I think. I haven't opened the door. I haven't gone to the window and lifted the curtain and leaned my ear into the night. I haven't said, "I hear you." I haven't said, "What do you want?" And yet last week, after a long day, I fell asleep on the couch at an angle with the TV dimmed. A glass of water sweating on the table. The window cracked for air. Sometime after midnight, I woke up because the room smelled very faintly of crushed flowers and heat. Not strong. Not dramatic. Just enough to notice and then doubt your notice. In the light from the adjacent building, my window glass showed my reflection, bled with the thin shape of the fire escape. I didn't see anything else. I told myself I didn't see anything else. I turned the fan higher until the hum shook out the thin, loose threads of silence. As I lay there, not asleep and not awake, I realized something that made the skin between my shoulder blades feel cold even in my stuffy apartment. The breath I hear, the one I thought I had brought home by accident, the one I try to drown with ordinary life, when it came that first night, and every time after, it always matched my own. Not exactly, but close. When I held mine, it held. When I let it go, it did too. A split second later, like a voice repeating a prayer it half remembers, listening intently for the words. It isn't the sound that makes me write this. It's the echo. I try to forget that most days. I try not to count the beats. I try to be as boring as possible. But I'm writing this tonight because as I sat in the dark and the air felt heavy and the fan hummed, and a siren somewhere far away made the brick wall ripple with a smear of light, I heard that thin breath again, and for once I didn't hear it at the door or the window or the wall. I heard it right behind my ear, as if my own apartment leaned in to listen to me. It was followed by the faintest sound, a sound so small I could have dreamed it. The softest suggestion of someone kneeling on old floorboards, the tiniest shift of weight, a patient shape arranging itself to wait. If anyone asks what it wants, I can't say. If anyone asks what I did to invite it, I can guess. I offered my ear. And now, when the night gets crowded, when the air turns to velvet that you can't quite breathe through, when I mistake my own heartbeat for footsteps, I wonder if I brought her home or if I only finally tuned into the place in every house where grief sits down. Maybe she follows anyone who listens. Maybe the city taught me how to hear what is everywhere. Or maybe, and this is what worries me most, it's not that she followed me at all. It's that I followed her, and I can't tell if I ever really left. I told myself I wouldn't post this because I didn't want to give it any more space in my head. But sleep has been weird since I got back from Savannah, and I'm starting to think sharing it will make the nights quieter. I'm not trying to convert anyone to believing in ghosts or curses or anything like that. I just want the knocking to stop, and I've noticed that when I talk about it out loud, it eases for a bit, like saying it drains some charge out of the battery. So here it is. If you know Savannah, you'll know the place I'm talking about. If you don't, you can Google it, though I'm not sure I recommend it at night. I was in town for a work thing, a conference at the convention center, name tags and lukewarm coffee and boxed sandwiches. My younger sister, Lily, lives in Atlanta, and decided to meet me for the weekend because she wanted old streets and good food, her words. She brought her friend Alicia, who I hadn't met before, quiet in a friendly way, photographer, big on historic textures and peeling paint. We checked into the hotel on Bay Street, the kind with patterned carpet you can't quite place and an elevator that dinged a half second after the doors opened, like it was catching up. The lobby had a bowl of green apples that looked real enough but were too perfect, and the front desk clerk, a woman with a silver cross on her neck and a voice like she'd been whispering since morning, leaned over and circled Colonial Park Cemetery on the cartoon map they hand out to tourists. "It's pretty in the day," she said. "The gates close at night. Don't go after dark." She said it lightly, like a joke, but the way she slid the pen back suggested it wasn't. We did the usual Savannah things. Spanish moss, pralines, a ghost tour that was 90% bad puns and dim lanterns. The man running it was named Rick, and had a hat that made him look like he'd been recruited from a costume store. He tried to sell us EMF meters that were obviously repurposed stud finders, and Lily kept bumping me with hers, making it beep. It was fun until it wasn't. If you've ever had a night shift, you know how the world gets thin around 10 or 11 p.m., like the veil of normal gets stretched. We were walking back toward the hotel, and we passed the fence of Colonial Park. The cemetery sits in the middle of the city, older than the country, the stones tilted at odd angles like teeth in an old jaw. The gate was closed. There were signs, no entry after dusk, no dogs, no alcohol. We weren't interested in going in, not really. We just leaned on the iron rails and looked in. Alicia took a few photos through the slats, the camera ticking softly in the quiet. Somewhere a car went by, throwing a slice of white light over the moss-covered branches, and then it was just cicadas and humidity. I could smell whetstone and something else like pennies and wet paper. A child giggled. It came from our right, 2 or 3 graves in and high, higher than a toddler, lower than a teenager. I turned and saw movement between 2 stones, low and fast like a cat would run, except there was no tail, no shape that made sense. Just a smudge moving, catching the corner of a streetlight before disappearing behind a slate marker. Lily grabbed my wrist. "Did you see that?" I said yes because I had, but part of me wanted to say no and keep walking and never talk about it. Alicia swung her lens toward the spot and took 3 quick shots. "Kids sneak in sometimes," she said, softer than she sounded. "Dumb prank." But she pushed the camera closer to her chest like she didn't want to look at the screen. We stood there for maybe another 30 seconds. Nothing else happened. The cicadas were relentless, like a faucet of sound that never closes. The light on the fence buzzed. Lily let go of my wrist and we walked back to the hotel. I tried to make a joke about Savannah ambiance and got a weak laugh. In the elevator, Lily leaned her head against the mirror and closed her eyes, and her reflection did that weird thing where mirrors that are slightly warped make your face long and tired. When we got to our floor, some housekeeper had propped a door open with a folded towel. Inside, a vacuum hummed, unattended. It struck me as off, but then again, hotels run on odd little moments like that. Our room had 2 queens and a rollaway for me. We argued half-heartedly about who got the bathroom first, then ended up brushing our teeth side by side like kids at summer camp. Alicia put her camera on the desk and plugged it in, one of those cameras that's part computer. We all checked our phones, the dim blue glow painting the room. Thunder muttered far away. Savannah's storms are like old men telling stories, long and quiet and occasionally surprising. I lay down on the rollaway, which had a rattle in one leg I thought I could fix if I were home with my tools, but here just sounded like a tiny cymbal every time I shifted. I heard the AC kick on and the thermostat click. Through the window, a perfect square of light from the parking lot lamp hit the drapes. I don't know when I fell asleep, but I remember the waking, and if you take nothing else from this, take the detail that I didn't wake slowly. My body snapped awake like a rubber band released. The room was dark except for the line of light under the door. The AC had kicked off, and what woke me was the sound of something scraping under the bed. Not dramatic, not like a scream or a bang, just a slow, deliberate drag, like a fingernail moving along cheap wood. It traveled from the foot of my rollaway along the side and stopped under my ribs. Lily said my name from her bed, not a question, but like a warning. My name, then a breath, then "Do you hear that?" In the same second, something brushed my ankle. Not a lot, just a pressure, as if a small hand had rested there to balance itself before letting go. My foot jerked. The frame rattled its little symbol. Alicia sat up, her ponytail casting a shadow against the ceiling. "It's the AC," she said. And then the AC, as if trying to back her up, came on hard and the scrape was erased by a wash of white noise. No one slept after that. We put on the TV and let it run on low, some cooking competition where they whisper about plating. Alicia pulled up the photos on her camera and scrolled through. There were the fence bars like staff lines on sheet music, the stones behind. She zoomed in on the corner where the thing had moved. "See?" she said, but then didn't finish the sentence. The light hit one section of grass and made it a different green than the rest, almost neon. There was a blur where the grass was slightly flattened in a long shape, as if something had skidded through. When she zoomed all the way in, there was a darker smudge at the head of the blur. It could have been a trick of the lens, some digital noise. I was happy to call it that, to say compression artifacts like I knew what it meant. Then she flipped to the next photo, taken seconds later, and the blur had moved. Not just shifted, but changed direction. The smudge was closer to the fence. And in the last one, taken when we'd all been standing there still, the smudge was on our side of the bars. I know that makes no sense. Photos are not doors. But the chain link pattern of the fence was behind the smear in that shot, as if whatever it was had already decided to come closer. We slept with the TV on and the bathroom light a warm square, and the curtains open enough to see the orange parking lot glow. At 4-something, a gentle knock came at the door. Not a hotel knock, not the bold bam 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 you get when housekeeping wants in. This was child knock rhythm, polite and tentative, 3 quick taps and a pause, then 3 again like a game. I sat up and felt my throat close for no rational reason. Lily whispered, "Don't move." Alicia said, "Probably drunk people, wrong door." But she stayed very still. After a minute, the knocking stopped. A good 10 minutes later, just when the quiet had grown roots, the sound came again. But not at the door. At the wall between our room and the next. It was lower, like it was happening near the baseboard, and it traveled from the head of Lily's bed to the foot, then across toward the door, then right behind the headboard of my rollaway. I swung my legs over and put my feet on the carpet and felt something wet. like the carpet had been wiped with a damp towel where I was about to step. We left for breakfast as soon as the sun made the sky a lighter shade of gray. The front desk clerk with the silver cross was still on, or maybe her shift started early. She looked at our faces longer than polite and then asked, "Everything all right with the room?" Lily said, "We had someone knocking next door." The clerk's mouth tightened. "We're not full," she said. "No one is in the room next to you on that side. We keep one cushion room on each floor when we can." She pulled up her screen, tapped around. "Look, if you want to switch floors, I can do that." We said yes. We didn't bring up the scrape under the bed. It felt theatrical to say aloud, like we were trying to scare her on purpose. We moved to a room 2 floors up. We opened the window curtain all the way. Alicia, who said she didn't really believe in anything, set a glass of water by the door, as a superstition she'd read somewhere. I didn't know what that was supposed to do, but I was grateful for any ritual. We spent the day walking the city, looking for ordinary sunlight to burn off the strangeness. We bought coffee that scalded our tongues. We watched a kid in Forsyth Park blow giant bubbles that caught the sun like oil. We talked to strangers. A man on a bench told us he had been stationed here in the Navy once in a year before we were born. Everyone had a story about the square they preferred. We avoided the cemetery without saying that was what we were doing. That evening, though, we ended up walking along Oglethorpe, and there it was again, as it always will be if you're in that part of town. The iron fence, the warping of the street into the years of the dead. The gate was closed. A couple was pressed together by the entrance, whispering. A police cruiser slid past, the officer inside not looking at the cemetery at all, which is its own kind of superstition. The air had a glassy feel before rain. Lily said, "Let's just cross the street," and I said, "Yeah, okay." But then a small voice, not words, just the tone children use when they call out to be noticed, came from the left. I didn't turn right away. In my peripheral vision, something scooted along the base of a headstone like a shadow had come loose and was playing at being a person. My scalp prickled in the most literal way, hair rising. Alicia took a photo without raising the camera, just press and hope. When we finally did look, nothing was there. The couple had gone. The cop was turning down a side street, and it was suddenly so quiet I realized I could hear our own breath moving. If you've ever taken a breath in a church when you're the only one there, you know that sound. Back at the hotel, at the new room with its different painting of a marsh on the wall, the knocks returned but softer and steadier, like someone trying to measure our patience. We called down to the desk. The night manager, a man this time, came up in a red tie and said he would do a sweep of the floor. He did, and he came back and said there was no one out there. He stood in the doorway with his hands on his belt as if he wasn't sure whether to step in. He listened with us. Nothing happened for a full minute. "Might be the ice machine," he said. "Sometimes it clicks when the tray drops." There was no ice machine on our floor. He said he'd have maintenance check for pipes in the morning. We thanked him. He paused before he left and said almost under his breath, "If you went by Colonial Park last night, don't talk about it outside after dark. It's like calling something over." Lily and I looked at each other, and Alicia, who had the stiff, bright expression of someone pretending not to be scared, said, "We're not worried, but thank you." He nodded and left so fast I could smell his cologne still hanging in the hall. At 2 or 3, I woke to the sound of the glass of water shifting against the carpet. Not spilling, not knocked over, just sliding a tiny distance uphill against the logic of the room. I watched it move the width of my fingernail, then stop. I didn't call out. I didn't want to start the echo of my name in the dark. My ankle, which I'd tucked under the blanket, felt suddenly cool, like a child's hand had rested there again, but this time through the fabric. I thought irrationally that if I didn't kick, it might leave me alone. The AC clicked. The wall tapped in that little rhythm. 3 knocks, pause, 3. There is something about small sounds in the middle of the night that rewires your brain into thinking big thoughts about little things. We left the next morning without telling each other we were leaving because of the cemetery. We packed in silence, the way you do after a funeral when everyone is playing normal but moving twice as fast. On the way out, I asked the clerk with the cross if she believed the stories. She said, "It's an old city." I said, "Okay, but the children?" She rubbed the edge of the cross between her fingers like a coin. "The children are like squirrels. They get used to being fed." I thought she meant tourists and attention. Now I'm not sure. Back home in my little apartment with the bad coffee maker and the entry light that stutters before it commits, I tried to shake it. For a day or two it worked. Work emails, laundry, the clockwork of normal life pulled me back into the stream. Then on the third night, I woke right at 3:12 a.m. Or at least that's what my microwave clock said when I walked out into the kitchen because I couldn't stand to be in bed anymore. The air was still. The fridge hummed. My upstairs neighbor dropped something heavy and swore, which made me smile in a tired way. I went to get a glass of water, and the cabinet door, which always hangs a little open because the magnet latch is weak, was closed. I know I didn't close it. It took me a full minute to process that detail. So small it felt petty to be scared of. Then there was a tap at the baseboard by my front door. 3. Pause. 3. I stood there, sweating in the cool room, and counted. 8 sets. Then silence. When I finally went back to bed, I tucked the covers around my ankles like I was 9 years old. The next day, I called Lily. I didn't want to ask because asking is making it real. But I asked anyway, "Are you hearing anything weird?" She was quiet so long I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, "Do you think a child can leave fingerprints that don't look right?" She'd come home to a smear on her hallway wall at knee height, like a greasy handprint except it had too many little lines in it, not like regular fingers. "Alicia says we're being suggestible," Lily said, trying to sound like she agreed. Then she said, "Alicia sent me a photo from last night. Her cat wouldn't go into the guest room. She took a picture of it sitting in the hallway, tail puffed, looking in. There's something in the mirror behind it like a fog shape. She sent it to me. I made myself look. If you wanted to be rational, you'd call it glare. If you wanted to sleep, you wouldn't look twice. But if you zoomed in, you could see the fog was the height of a child and slightly wrong in the ways children are right. We tried to starve it of attention. We didn't talk about it after dark. We didn't look at the photos except once in a bright coffee shop at noon, with cheerful music on. We told the story to each other in the daylight version. Remember that time we scared ourselves at the historic cemetery with the walking tour guy and the stupid hat? It helped, it really did. The knocks faded for a few nights and I woke up at regular human times. Then a week later I came home and found muddy little smudges on my welcome mat, like someone with small shoes had stood there in wet grass and shuffled. It hasn't rained in my city for days. I live on the 3rd floor, walk up, no elevator. I tried to think of a neighbor kid, but none of my neighbors have kids. I would know, because in the morning we all do that half smile to each other in the hall like we live on top of each other and are pretending we don't. I cleaned the mat and told myself it was something I didn't understand yet. Understanding is a big warm blanket when you don't have any. 2 days after that, Lily called me in the afternoon. She'd gone to lunch with a coworker and came back to her office to discover her desk drawer open and her stash of little mints scattered. "Teeth marks," she said, weak laugh. "Like tiny ones." I told her it was mice. She took a picture and sent it. The mints were impressed with little half moons, too far apart for mice, too small for a person, and there were 5 in a cluster like a hand had set them down in a circle. Lily said she'd get traps. I told her to be careful what she catches. I went to the building's office to ask if anyone else had reported knocking. The manager, a guy who wears polo shirts with our building's name embroidered above his heart like he's on a team, shook his head. "We get pipes," he said. "Old building." He offered to send maintenance to check my radiator. I said sure. The maintenance guy came by and banged on things and left. The knocks didn't stop. They got a little more patient, maybe. They learned my schedule. A friend of mine is a cop. Well, a desk cop now after a knee injury, but enough of one that he likes to solve things in straight lines. He came over with coffee and did a walkthrough of my place like it was a crime scene. He looked at the windows, he checked the locks, he stood in the dark with me at midnight and waited. Nothing happened for 20 minutes, and he started telling me a story about a swan that had attacked him as a kid. I started to feel stupid. Then the knocks came, 1, 2, 3, like a child scolding a dog. He turned his head slightly, not quite wanting to show he'd heard, and then he said, "Could be your downstairs neighbor." I said my downstairs neighbor was a woman in her 70s who watches reality shows with the volume low and brings her recycling down twice a week. He said sound can travel weird. He finished his coffee and told me to call if I heard anything else. He didn't say if you're scared, which I appreciated. The next day he texted, "This is going to sound nuts, but did you put cornmeal outside your door?" I hadn't. There was a line of it, he said, which he'd noticed when he came back to the building to drop something off to another friend. like someone sprinkled it. He didn't laugh. He didn't follow up. I didn't either. I started wearing earplugs at night. The foam ones that make your head feel like it's under a pillow. It helped with the knocks, but not the other thing. The presence of attention. That pressure on the ankles or the feeling of something ducking down when I looked. I stopped letting my foot hang off the bed. I laughed at myself for that in the daylight and didn't change my behavior after dark. I set a glass of water by the door like Alicia did. It would be a little off-center when I woke up. If I marked the carpet with the edge of a library card to check, the glass was a fingernail's width to the left in the morning. Every time. I'm not saying it's definitely connected to Colonial Park, except it is. I didn't have this before. The clerk's voice. The don't talk about it outside after dark. The smallness of the movements that feels exactly like a child making sure you notice them without getting caught. That all started there. I called the cemetery office during business hours one afternoon, telling myself I was asking about tours. The woman who answered sounded like she'd said the same things 1,000 times. "We close the gates at 5, she said. "There's a chain and a lock." I didn't ask her, "What about the ones who get out anyway?" But I think she would have had an answer. Alicia finally sent the full set of the photos she took through the fence in a folder labeled Savannah Textures, a name that makes it sound like something you could fold and put in a drawer. I looked through them quickly, ready to delete. Then I noticed a detail I hadn't seen on the camera screen. In the last photo, the one where the smudge seemed to be on our side of the bars, there are little marks in the dirt along the sidewalk. Not footprints, not really. More like where a child would claw or drag their fingers to pull themselves along inch by inch, the way kids do when they're playing at being invisible. They're still faint even when you brighten the photo, but there are 5 little grooves crooked like a child's. I printed one of the photos because I thought putting it on paper would make it less of a thing. I set it on my desk under the desk lamp and tried to do other work so it would become something on my desk. A few hours later, I looked over and there were new streaks across the glossy paper, oily and pale, like someone with small hands had run their fingers down the image from top to bottom while I wasn't looking. The lamp bulb burned out that night. I was grateful for the dark. Funny detail. You start to notice how many children there are in your building only when you're listening for child sounds. I heard a giggle in the stairwell last week and almost turned and laughed in relief. Just normal life. Except when I went to look, no one was there, and the giggle stayed in the air a half-second too long, like a recording ending. And I know this is ridiculous and not scientific, but the giggle sounded like it knew me now, like it had learned my name without needing to say it. I'm not going to tell you a dramatic ending because I don't have one. No priest, no sage, no moment where I confronted something and it moved on. If you came for that, I'm sorry. This is just my account of the small things that made sleep feel like an experiment, and the way a city with old stones can spill over into your ordinary apartment if you let it, or even if you don't. The knocks have spaced out. Some nights there's nothing. Some nights I get 3 sets and then silence. Sometimes I wake up with the sensation that my blanket has been tugged a little lower down my leg. An inch. Nothing more. I pull it back up and tell myself it slipped. I do one thing now that I didn't do before. When I get home after dark, I don't say anything at the door. I used to greet my apartment in a joking way. Home, sweet home, or it's me again. Now I turn the key and go straight in and let the quiet sit. I set a glass of water by the door. I place my shoes side by side, toes touching the mat, like a kid would line up toys after being told to tidy. Some mornings, the shoes are a little more apart than I left them, like someone with small feet stood between them for a minute and considered coming further. I'm posting this because last night I woke to the sound of knocking again. The same gentle 3 and then a new sound. Paper sliding against wood. I got up and went to the door and found my welcome mat pulled back and tucked under itself, like a child had tried to crawl under and couldn't quite fit. There were no footprints, just a whisper of dust at knee level on the inside of the door, the kind you get if a hand that's been playing in dry dirt pats something lightly. I cleaned it. I went back to bed. I thought about Savannah and the iron fence and those stones older than the country, and I wondered how the gates keep anyone in when the city keeps calling them out. With our tourists laughing and our cameras and our way of standing and looking through bars at night thinking we're safe, if you read this and you go there anyway because we all think we're the exception, do me a favor and don't lean on the fence after dark, and don't speak out loud if you can help it. And if you hear a child giggle from behind a stone and see a smudge that moves like a shadow would if it had hands, Don't invite it by paying too much attention. I didn't, and I still have to check under my bed the way I did when I was 7. I still tuck the blanket under my ankles. I still stop myself from saying hello to my own home. And when I hear polite knocks at 3 in the morning, I count to 6 and I listen and I wait for the pause. It always pauses like it wants me to respond. I haven't answered yet. I'm writing this so I won't forget to keep not answering. The knocks just now. Sorry, I just looked at the microwave clock. It's 3:12 again. Have started up again on the baseboard by the wall. 3. Pause. 3. They sound smaller than last week, but closer. I'm going to hit post and put the phone face down and not say a word. If the water glass moves, I'll move it back in the morning and pretend it didn't. If you hear the same rhythm in your house tomorrow, I'm sorry. Maybe it found you through this. Or maybe you went and leaned on that fence like we did, and you already knew how this ends, which is not really an ending at all. I never thought I'd share this, but the story won't leave me alone, and I'm tired of pretending it didn't happen. I know how this kind of thing sounds online. Clickbait titles, shaky phone footage, the usual chorus of pics or it didn't happen. I get it. I used to be one of those people, but what I'm going to write down happened to me 2 winters ago, near Midlothian, Illinois, in a place plenty of locals already avoid, Bachelor's Grove. If you know the name, you already know the reputation. Between the old legends and the newer ones, it's basically a destination for teens who want to dare, and adults who want to feel like teens for a night. I fell somewhere in the middle. I was 28, working early shifts at a repair shop off Cicero, and I'd heard enough stories from customers and coworkers to roll my eyes every time someone brought it up. Then my sister Lena moved back from school in Champaign, and she got close with this guy named Ezra, who worked at the radio station out by Oak Forest. Ezra was tall and polite, and always had a thermal mug in his hand even when it was hot outside. He collected cassette recorders because, according to him, they picked up voice frequencies more honestly than digital. He'd nod and smile when you told him that sounded like nonsense. The 3 of us hung out a lot that fall doing cheap things: thrift stores, late-night diners, hikes along frozen creeks where the geese made that hollow barking sound. When the first snow stuck for real, Ezra said we should go to Bachelor's Grove and test his new field kit, which was a fancy way of saying 2 cassette recorders, a cheap EMF meter, and a heavy flashlight rubber banded to a tripod. I told him I'd rather watch a movie. He told me real movies happen when you leave the house. Lena gave him that look she gets when she's trying to push me out of my rut. I finally gave in, but I made a big show of grabbing my thickest coat and an extra beanie and lecturing them about how I didn't want to get a ticket for trespassing. Ezra said it wasn't like we were hopping a mansion fence. We'll be quick, he promised. In, out, we capture some quiet, and if we hear anything we don't like, we go. It was late January late when the sky is the color of dishwater and every sound is covered in a layer of frost. My car has a bad rear defroster, so Lena sat in the back scraping the fog with a library card while Ezra read directions from a folded paper map he kept in his coat. The access trail to the cemetery was unplowed, a narrow throat of darkness off 143rd Street, and when we pulled over on the shoulder we could hear the low hum of the power lines. The air smelled like exhaust and wet wood. It's a small cemetery. You see a lot of photos and think it's sprawling, but the fenced part isn't big. What's bigger is the woods beyond, Cook County Forest Preserve land, spindly trees that seem to tilt without ever falling, and that beaver pond with the water scummed over in winter, black and slick like the underside of a lid. The first odd thing felt normal. The temperature dropped hard as we stepped off the road, and you could smell that iron smell you get near water. Our boots squeaked in the crusted snow. Ezra was already narrating into one of his recorders, announcing the date and time and GPS coordinates, even though his GPS had died, even though he'd chosen cassette because of the warmth of it. Lena rolled her eyes at me, but she was smiling in that excited way like she always does when there's the chance of finding something we can tell later. I kept my flashlight down on the path out of courtesy for drivers, because I know from working near the railroad that sudden light in the wrong place can make people overcorrect. And I didn't want to be the headline that night. From the road we cut into the trail, which is dirty in summer but clean in winter, and the soundscape changed. No tire hiss, no distant music, just the buzzing of frozen weeds rubbing together when the wind blew. The cemetery fence appeared little by little. The padlock on the chain was newish, but the fence sagged in a way that invited you to duck under. We stood there for a minute, not out of respect, but because once the fence was in front of us, the decision became real. It wasn't a dare anymore. We could see the split gravestones and the way the snow pooled in the depressions, and the way the trees leaned toward the clearing like they were happy it was empty. Ezra said we should set the tripod in the middle so we could rotate between headstones. He had this specific way of avoiding walking over graves, stepping wide and slow. I appreciated that. Lena ran her glove over a stone and read a name that had been eaten by lichen and time. She asked who mowed the place. I said probably the county, and we all looked around for signs of maintenance. There were some plastic flowers half frozen to the ground near the largest stone, the one people always post online. It looked dull and pitted. The flashlight made it look like skin. We started the first recording session with the usual nonsense questions you'd ask in a place like that, even if you don't believe. Is anybody here? And can you tell us your name? Ezra kept his voice mellow, like he was interviewing a late-night caller who might hang up if he sounded impatient. After a few minutes, the EMF meter clicked up one light and then settled down. I told him it was the power lines. He nodded like he agreed, but I could tell from the way he stared out past the fence that he was listening for something else. You probably know the urban legends about the phantom farmhouse that appears out there, pale and out of place like someone set a model house down in the woods and forgot to pick it back up. You probably know about the white lady photo too, the one where she's sitting on a cracked gravestone in a dress that falls like smoke. I grew up with those stories on the internet and in whispers, so to me they had the same weight as any ghost photo. Basically zero. Still, after the first 15 minutes of listening to nothing but the crackle of our coats and the occasional creak of ice, I started to feel the way you feel when you're in a friend's basement and the lights are off, and someone starts talking about how you can't see the bottom of the stairs. Your body knows it's dumb, but your brain decides to try a little fear on just to see if it fits. Lena squeezed my elbow once, like she could feel me tightening. She climbed up on the biggest gravestone to get a view above the brush. It's weirdly bright, she said, for how little light there is. I got what she meant. The snow diffused everything, so there were no sharp shadows, but the darkness between the trees didn't end. It stacked in layers, soft but bottomless. We did a second session near the back where the fence almost kisses the forest. Ezra placed one recorder on the ground and kept the other up by his chest. We stood in a wide triangle and faced outward. He asked if anyone knew the name of the pond, and for a while it was quiet. And then I heard something like a sigh from the direction of the woods. Not a person, not a deer. It had that strange roundness, like the air itself exhaling. It's easy to explain away. Wind moves around snow and frozen cattails and makes pockets. But it went on too long, and it had a pattern to it. Faint but there, almost like a breath that had been living on the edge of the clearing, and decided to come closer in a way you wouldn't notice until it was already next to your ear. I'm making it sound dramatic. In the moment, it was small enough to doubt. I told myself I wanted coffee. Ezra said, "Did you catch that?" Without looking at us. We all stood still and didn't talk for a minute. The way you go quiet when a neighbor drops something in the apartment above you and you're waiting to hear if they swear or laugh. We moved to the fence line. There's a particular spot people mention online, a gap where the fence sags and you can see deeper into the brush. It's really nothing during the day, just a view over elbow-high tangles and a crooked line of trees. But that night I saw a light somewhere beyond the dark. Not a flashlight, not a plane, and not a house I recognized. It was a flat rectangle of pale yellow, wrong for the forest. Like a door was open in a building hidden by the trees. Ezra was the first to say it. "Don't freak out. I think I see the farmhouse." I laughed, a short bark I couldn't control. It felt like we were admitting something we had all agreed not to admit. Lena went on her toes and then grabbed the sag in the fence to steady herself. The rectangle expanded and then shrank, the way lights do when you move your head slightly. I lifted my hand to shade my eyes from our flashlight and realized the tripod beam was pointed too low to make the glow. The thing out there felt separate, like it was generating its own muted air. I told myself it was a reflection from the road, but we weren't facing the road. "Let's not go out there," I said, a little too fast, and I was grateful that it came out funny instead of afraid. Ezra tilted his head, listening with his whole body. I could see it in the set of his shoulders. "We won't," he said. "We'll stay by the fence, but I want to point the mic that way." He stepped closer to the sag and lifted the recorder, and the second odd thing happened. A smell came into the clearing, slow and thin. old wood and wet plaster. It made me think of the inside of abandoned houses in summer when everything sweats. It didn't belong to winter, and it didn't belong to a frozen forest. Ezra whispered, "Do you smell that?" And we both nodded, even though I didn't want to. The rectangular light flickered like firelight through a window, except no fire is that steady. It was that steady like bad fluorescent lights, except warm like a filament bulb. I told myself we were staring into someone's backyard and we just couldn't see the rest because our eyes were ruined by the flashlight. I told myself there was a shed out there with the door open. I told myself a lot. Then we heard something scrape. It wasn't loud. It was that small kind of scraping, like a chair leg moving a few inches over a gridded floor. It sounded close, but the snow was undisturbed except for our boot prints. Ezra's EMF meter ticked up one light. I stepped back automatically and bumped a gravestone, and the cold soaked through my jeans instantly where my calf brushed it. I apologized under my breath to whatever name was worn away there. When I stood up straight again, Lena had her phone pointed out beyond the fence. I didn't even see her take it out of her pocket. That wasn't like her. She usually keeps it buried and lectures other people to pay attention. The screen cast a small blue shape across her face. "It doesn't show up," she said, her voice small. "I'm trying to lock exposure. It's just black." She sounded disappointed more than anything. We started to get the sense of edges. That was the worst part. The glow wasn't just floating. It had a relationship to the dark. That's how I knew my eyes weren't playing tricks. The light hugged a plane, and the plane had a corner. And behind that corner, the dark was thicker. And beyond that, a line of something that might have been a roof. Ezra breathed out slowly through his nose, and the sound fogged his scarf. "I want to try one thing," he said. "Let's all close our eyes and count to 5 and then open them so we get a fresh look." "Why?" I asked. "To see if it's just retinal burn-in. If we all see the same thing after a reset." He didn't finish because he knew how that sounded. We did it anyway. I closed my eyes. The inside of my eyelids were marbled with the pale afterimage of our flashlight beam. I counted to 5. When I opened them, the glow in the woods was brighter than before, not by a lot. Just enough that the edge of the plane, it had to be a wall, caught some snowflakes drifting and made a thin stutter of reflections that ran down the surface like they were alive. The breath sound came again, longer. It was not the wind. I only ever heard wind carry or break. This sounded like something contained and methodical, something that had lungs. That was when we noticed the figure on the stone. I want to say I noticed her first to make myself feel useful. But it was Lena. She lowered her phone and pointed at the central grave where we'd balanced the recorder earlier. A woman was sitting on it, or looked like a woman, with her shoulders rounded forward and her hands folded in her lap. Her hair, or something like hair, hung in a line impossible to parse in that lighting. I know how a white dress behaves when it's lit by a flashlight in winter. This was not that. This dress drank light even as it glowed like new snow eaten by shadow. She didn't look at us. She didn't move. She just sat like she was nobody's business. It did not feel cinematic. It felt rude to stare, like we had walked into a family cemetery at the wrong time. Ezra's recorder made a soft click from the tape, the way it does when a microscopic tension shifts. He put his hand on my sleeve without looking. None of us said hello. Ezra, of all people, didn't ask a question. It felt like if we spoke, we would be calling something over. I noticed small, dumb details. The way the snow around her feet looked wet without being melted. The way her dress didn't gather like fabric, not really. It fell in continuous lines, as if drawn by a careful hand that didn't want to lift the pencil. The sound of the trees wasn't a sound anymore, but a presence. Like somebody standing behind your chair while you tie your shoe and you can't decide if it's your dad or a stranger. From the woods, the rectangular glow turned a deeper color for an instant, the way a bulb does when a current dips and comes back. The smell of wet plaster thickened. Lena said, too quietly to be brave, "I don't think she's for us." I understood what she meant. The woman on the stone was watching something that wasn't there, or wasn't visible to us, and we were the rude ones watching her watch. My teeth hurt as if I had bitten a metal fork. My legs did that thing where they don't feel like legs. I think that's the moment your body tries to choose between running and fainting, and it picks neither. Ezra finally whispered, "We should leave now," and we all nodded so fast it might have looked funny if anyone had been there to see. The problem was leaving would have meant passing close to the central stones to get to the hole in the fence we'd used, or doing something shameful like climbing over in a panic and ripping our coats. We stood there doing the math with our eyes. Three adults reduced to the problem-solving skills of anxious dogs. From the road, somewhere beyond the trees, a car passed, and its sound was so normal that for a second I felt dizzy with gratitude for the world. The noise washed over the clearing and then died, and in the freeze that followed I heard footsteps. Not heavy, not dramatic. Footsteps like someone walking carefully on old floorboards, trying not to wake a light sleeper. They didn't come from the snow and they didn't come from behind us. They came from the direction of the glow, and they had that hollow character that makes wood sound like a drum if you tap it with your knuckle. I glanced at the white figure and it hadn't moved. It didn't react to the steps. The steps paused like someone looking over a railing, and then resumed, and the glow grew a fraction brighter. And I remembered something stupid. A story one of my coworkers told about how the farmhouse sometimes showed up, and if you looked through the window, you'd see rooms that weren't in the right order. A staircase that went nowhere. He'd told it to get a rise out of me when I had a wrench in my hand. I'd said that house didn't exist. Now the smell of wet plaster swooped and my nostrils flared on their own. We backed toward the opposite corner of the fence and found another low spot. We didn't speak. We didn't run. If we ran, we would hear pursuit, and I didn't want to learn what pursuit sounded like from that direction. As we ducked, the EMF meter ticked up another light, and then all the lights died. Not just on the meter, but on the flashlight, which is the kind of cliché I hate. But it didn't go dramatic dark. It just muted by maybe 30%. A dimmer switch to bring the trees closer without taking them away. The woman on the stone, if she was a woman, softened at the edges like someone was exhaling while drawing her. Ezra whispered, "Don't look back," in the most careful voice I've ever heard him use, as if he was talking to a fragile kid on a high ledge. We went through the sag and into the woods along the trail, the one that everyone calls the trail, but which is really just a seam where fewer bushes have chosen to grow. I took the lead out of habit. I know trails, I know how not to twist my ankle on roots, but my feet didn't feel mine. The breath sound accompanied us, slow and patient, not behind, not ahead, but threading through the bare branches in exact rhythm with how I would have breathed if I were trying to match someone else, so they wouldn't know I was copying. We didn't get far before the light changed again. It didn't get brighter or darker. It changed temperature, a word I used to make fun of photographers for using. It got warmer, but not in the comforting way. It felt like opening the door to a house with the radiators hissing too close to the couch. I could see the outline of what my brain named a roofline where there had been only trees. It was wrong. Set at an angle that didn't belong to any structure I know. You could smell dust that isn't there anymore. I heard, or thought I heard, a hinge squeak. Then the careful footsteps again, like someone framed in a doorway at night. We broke into the open near the road all at once, like surfacing after swimming blind, and the sight of the shoulder and the soft reflectors glued to the guardrail felt like a miracle. The car sat exactly where we'd left it, my poor rear defroster still a diagonal blur from where Lena's library card had scraped earlier. There's a small pull-off there, and somebody had left 2 fast food cups tipped over in it, frozen in a shallow skid. The mundane stuff nearly made me cry. Ezra fumbled with the keys and dropped them. The sound they made when they hit the asphalt was so sharp it sounded like it happened miles away. We piled in and slammed the doors as if anything out there would obey the courtesy of a closed car door. We didn't talk for a stretch of 143rd Street that felt longer than it is. I kept glancing at the rear view to see if any light would appear where it shouldn't. The mirror offered only my own eyes and the smudged halo of the back windshield. When we finally talked, we fell into the opposite problem. Too many words. Ezra said something about audio artifacts and wanting to check the tapes alone before he brought them to us. And I was offended for a second and then wasn't, because I didn't actually want to hear whatever we could hear that night. Lena asked if we'd seen the way the figure on the stone held her hands, how her fingers were too long for the proportions of her arms, and I told her my brain probably did that by itself. We laughed once, a short, jagged sound, and then a siren went by on Cicero. The flashing lights didn't hit us, but they painted the tops of the trees in the median and made them move like they had changed their minds. Back at my apartment, we didn't go inside right away. We stood on the stoop in our coats like people on a smoke break who don't smoke, the cold in our faces anchoring us. My neighbor from upstairs, an old guy named Mr. Peck, shuffled out to dump a bag of recycling and told us we smelled like wet basement. He wasn't wrong. "You kids go to the river?" He grunted, and then he went back inside without waiting for an answer. I wish the story ended with the tapes being blank or obviously fake. I wish it ended with us dismissing it, losing touch with Ezra and letting the whole night collapse into a thing we talked about after a couple beers. The opposite happened. The next morning, Ezra texted a photo of a strip of tape held up to a window. You couldn't tell anything from the picture except that he had working thumbs. 12 minutes later, he called and asked if I could come over because he didn't want to listen alone anymore. I told my boss I was sick, which wasn't entirely a lie. Ezra's apartment was warm in a way that made you sleepy. He had hung heavy blankets around his living room to dampen the sound, and he had his deck on the coffee table with headphones and a little amp. The room smelled like the last brand of tea, a rotating collection of roots and dried fruit. Lena came too, hair still wet from her shower, cheeks red. The three of us sat on the floor like we were kids because nobody had thought to pull out chairs. Ezra hit play and the tape whispered to life. Most of it was what you'd expect. Our boots, our nervous laughs, a dog bark from someone's backyard a long way off, the EMF meter clicking faintly. The tape chewed a little where we moved the tripod. Then there was a band of sound that doesn't belong to microphones. I've recorded enough in garages with fans on to recognize what's environmental. This wasn't that. It was a breathing, not a person's and not wind. It fell exactly between inhale and exhale you could diagram on a board. Slow, damp, patient. It was so clear it made me hold my own breath so I wouldn't confuse it. 20 seconds of it went by, and I could tell from the way Lena's hands pressed together that she was counting with me in her head like she does when she wants to see if a sound is looping. It didn't loop. It never repeated in a way I could map. It felt like something considering us, deciding what to do with us. After that came a new sound, and I'll write it the way I still hear it. Footfalls on stairs, 6 of them, spaced like someone making sure not to wake their sleeping partner. The tape didn't lie. It was too specific. It had the wooden hollowness of a house that's been moved too many times and never re-leveled. The worst part wasn't the breaths or the steps. It wasn't even the moment where a woman's voice appeared so quietly under Ezra's asking, "Is anybody here?" that we almost missed it and then rewound and felt the room tilt. The voice, if it was a voice, said 3 words. I'm used to suggestion, and I know once you say what you think you heard, everyone hears it. So we played it again without guessing, a dozen times until we all agreed we could hear the same thing. It was close to the mic and far, like a whisper in a hallway through a door. It said, "It's warm now." You can lean a lot on that sentence. It can mean anything. We played it until we were sick of it, and then we sat quietly and drank scalding tea so our hands would have something to hold. Ezra said he wanted to talk to someone he knew at the station who had access to better gear, not for publicity, but to see if they'd tell him we were just hearing our own mouths folded. He swore he wouldn't share names or exact location. We believed him because his face didn't know how to sell a lie. That afternoon, he walked the tape down to his job. We didn't hear from him for 2 days, which was normal for Ezra when he dropped into a project. On the 3rd day, I got a text from Lena that said, "Ezra wants us to come back tonight," followed by immediately, I told him no, and then, "But he's going anyway." I called him and told him to wait for us if he had to go. Or better yet, don't, and he laughed and said, "I'm not dumb, man. I'm just going to drive past on 143rd and see what the weather did to the trail." He sounded wired and reasonable at the same time. I told him to text when he was done. He said, of course, and then said, "Did you hear that the white lady photo might be a double exposure?" Which was his way of saying he didn't fully believe what he was doing. I said, "Everything might be a double exposure," and then we both hung up, friendly in the way you are when the person on the other end might do something unwise and you can't control them. I kept my phone close all evening. At 9, Lena and I exchanged a few cautious texts about whether we should drive by, and then she said she'd call me if Ezra checked in with her first. At 10:30, I started rehearsing a speech in my head about boundaries and grown-ups and the difference between curiosity and courting trouble. At 11, I called him and got his voicemail. I didn't leave a message. At 11:20, someone knocked on my door, 3 polite taps. I looked through the peephole and saw a man in a Cook County Forest Preserve jacket and a reflective beanie. The hallway was full of the smell of snow melting off boots. He held his cap in his hand like he was a teacher visiting a parent. I opened the door a few inches. He introduced himself as Officer Morales. He told me he was doing a wellness check on a vehicle registered to Ezra's name that had been found on the shoulder near the trailhead, unlocked, with no sign of the driver in the immediate area. He said a good Samaritan had called it in around 10. He said there were fresh prints to and from the fence and back, size 11s, maybe, and a second set similar and a third set smaller, possibly a woman's, all overlaying each other. He asked if I knew where Ezra was likely to be. I said probably work, and then immediately corrected myself because I knew the station wasn't staffed that late. Morales listened like he'd listened to every lie anybody told, not to catch me but to let me get done. I called Lena and she arrived in her coat and slippers, hair uncombed under a hat, eyes glossy. We stood in my kitchen while Morales made calls on his radio with words that sounded more technological than the situation deserved. He asked if Ezra had any medical conditions, any history of depression, any old beef that might make him go out there alone. We said no so many times it became stupid. Eventually he told us they'd found tracks from a fourth person. Hard to say, but possibly prints that came to the fence and stopped like someone had stood watching for longer than they should. The hairs on my forearms stood up even though I was already cold. Morales asked us not to go out there. He said they'd cruise the road for a while and call in county if it turned into a report. He said sometimes people get turned around in the woods for all sorts of dumb reasons. Phones dead, snow glare, too much confidence. He never said the word ghost and we never said it to him. After he left, we did the thing he told us not to. We put on our boots and drove out anyway. I know. The car was where he said it would be. The hazard lights off, the interior light on. The driver's door canted open like someone had opened it with their foot while their arms were full. The tracks in the snow were a mess. You could read them if you had the skill, but I don't. I saw the pattern Morales meant, back and forth and back. A rhythm that didn't do the usual loop of teenagers daring each other to jump the fence and run. It went to the fence, then parallel, then back to the car, then to the fence again and stopped in a place that made my throat hurt. Morales' SUV pulled up behind us 5 minutes later and he didn't yell because yelling would have meant he was mad. He was more like a tired uncle. He told us again to go home and this time we listened. The whole time we were there I kept waiting for that breath sound to gather in the spaces between the trees, but it didn't. The woods were old and quiet and very good at not telling us anything. Ezra texted the next afternoon. "I'm okay," he wrote. "Sorry about last night. I felt weird and drove around for a while." He added a second message that said, "I think I left the recorder by the big stone." I called immediately. He picked up and sounded like he'd been up all night, but he didn't sound scared. He sounded embarrassed, like a kid caught skipping a class he loved. He said he'd call Morales and I told him he should and he said he would, and he probably did because we didn't hear from the officer again. In the weeks after, Ezra didn't ask us to go back. He returned to his habit of carrying tea and talking about bass frequency responses like they were living things that needed coaxing. We asked him about the tape once and he said he'd misfiled it. He smiled when he said it, but the smile was a thing he put on his face on purpose and his eyes didn't agree. Lena and I resolved to leave it alone. I still live off Cicero. When I drive to work on mornings when the fog hovers above the salt gray piles of snow, I sometimes detour past the trailhead without admitting that's what I'm doing. I slow down. I tell myself I'm checking for deer. The fence is almost always empty. The woods look like any woods. It's been 2 winters and sometimes I think I manufactured the whole thing because it dovetails so neatly with the stories other people have told, and my brain is a lazy plagiarist. Then something small will happen, like last week when the heat in my apartment clanged and I smelled wet plaster for 1 second with no source. And I will want to open a window to change the air and I won't, because I'm afraid the air on the other side will be warmer in a way it shouldn't be. Every now and then I run into Officer Morales at the grocery store. He buys grapefruit and instant rice and always nods to me first like he's telling me he remembers my name even if he never says it. Once he asked if my friend was doing better. I said yes and he said good, and neither of us clarified which friend. Ezra left the station for a new job in Milwaukee last month. He sent a photo of an empty living room with moving boxes and a joke about how his tea kettle looked lonely without couches. He didn't mention the tape and we didn't ask. Lena teases me that we're all fine now. That the night was a weird blip in a winter stuffed with weird blips. That life goes on and the woods don't care. I agree a lot. I agree like it's my job. I tell myself the woman on the stone was a trick of focus, that the farmhouse was a reflection, and that the breathing was wind curving around the pond and back through the trees with the regularity of a human chest. I keep my flashlight new and my car doors locked, and I don't like the smell of old houses anymore. I avoid them because when I do step inside, when I push into a stairwell that has sucked up every coat smell from the last 40 years, there is a moment before the warmth hits my face where I hear a soft shift in the wood and the thick, patient rhythm of someone inhaling, and I think stupidly that it's welcoming me. When I pull the door shut behind me, I swear I feel another door closing somewhere I can't see, and I stand still a second longer than necessary, listening, waiting for the footsteps that may or may not be following me down a hallway, that may or may not exist in a house that may or may not be there at all, and sometimes for no reason I can name. In rooms I've known my whole life, I find my hands folded in my lap, patient as if I'm waiting for someone else to return from the stairs with news about how warm it is now. And it takes a beat before I remember to uncurl my fingers and move. I never planned to write this down, but last night I caught my reflection talking to me in the dark kitchen window, and it said a name I haven't told anyone in years. I'm not dramatic. I'm a regular guy who double knots his shoes and forgets to water his plants. But I need to get this out of me because I think the story didn't end where I thought it did. And if anyone in El Paso still does the stupid things we did that summer, maybe this will nudge them away. Back then I lived off Montana Avenue, an upstairs one-bedroom in a stucco fourplex with an iron staircase that clanged like a railroad when you took it too fast. I stocked shelves nights at a grocery store near Airway and worked part-time at my cousin's auto shop on weekends. The kind of schedule where your body's never sure if it's morning or night. My cousin Marco is the sort who can make a carburetor sound like a joke you should have heard already. He's easy to be around and bad at saying no. That last part is how all this started. We'd both grown up hearing about Concordia Cemetery. If you live here, you know it without trying to know it. School trips, ghost tours, weird cousins from out of town who want to look at the Old West. The cemetery sits on that chunk of desert where the wind carries grit into your socks. The iron fence out front is done up with little points on top. And there's this stretch of road where the streetlights don't quite make up their mind to glow. It looks ordinary during the day. After sunset, it looks like a place that learned to hold its breath. My friend Tasha is the third person you need to understand. She worked nights with me at the store, scanning cans and humming old sparkly pop songs under her breath. She was saving up for a certification exam to get out of retail. If you've ever met someone who treats each person like a story and not a transaction, that was Tasha. She could make a man buying cat litter tell his divorce timeline without realizing it. People loved telling her things. That matters later. The week it started, it rained. Not much. Just that sticky stovetop sizzle of rain that hits El Paso a few times a year and makes the asphalt shine like a fresh bruise. The clouds blew east by 9, but the smell stayed the way it does. Wet dust and tar and weeds that pretend they're grass. I remember because I kept working the bottles aisle, and every time the automatic doors opened, that smell pulled at my attention. Something in me got quiet, like when someone says your name in a room you thought you were in alone. Around 10, Tasha started telling me about a ghost tour her neighbor had tried to sell her on. They go to Concordia at midnight, she said, like she was listing an item she wouldn't buy but wanted to talk about. The guy dresses like an old-timey undertaker. They stand by the iron fence and call for this midnight rider like he's a stray cat. Sure, I said. And he checks the schedule before haunting people. Union regulations. She smiled, but her face stayed thoughtful. My neighbor swears she heard hooves. Not like a recording. You know how metal sounds when it vibrates? She said it made the fence sing, like someone dragging a tuning fork across it. And the guy whispered to her, but nobody else heard it. She said he said, "Get out before I take you too." Fun, I said, but I didn't like that phrase. It felt written for a movie that spent too much on makeup, but it sat heavy in my ears. Marco was supposed to pick me up after my shift to grab late-night tacos, and when he got there, he had that look he gets before he suggests a bad idea. "I got us a side job," he said, thumb tapping the steering wheel at every red light. "Salazar's widow asked me to look at the caretaker shed out at Concordia. Says the door keeps swinging open. Figures it's the wind but wants to be sure. She offered cash. Tonight? She said midnight is when it happens." I laughed because of course it was. Salazar, like the groundskeeper guy? The one with the hat? The same. He died last year. Left the cemetery caretaking to his nephew, but the kid's never around. I told her we'd just check the hinges. Tasha had a late lunch break that turned into a please I need air 15-minute exit, so I texted her from the passenger seat, "Want tacos?" "Midnight errand near Concordia." She replied with a horse emoji and a thumbs down, then 3 dots for a while. "Then I'm coming. Don't start without me. I owe you for covering register last week." We met her by the all-night laundromat on Piedras. She brought hot chocolate in a thermos, the kind with a lid that never quite seals. She climbed into the back seat and immediately began venting about a customer who'd tried to pay with 31 pennies and a Canadian dime. Marco got us onto the border highway, that flat run where the Rio Grande is a slash of darker dark. Out the windows, the city lights were a low, scattered glow, like campfire coals trying to remember heat. When we parked by the cemetery, the night did that thing it sometimes does in the desert. It looks empty, but the minute you get out of the car, there's a hiss of wind with tiny teeth. Dry grass scratched against the curb. A dog barked once from a long way off and then didn't again. A train horn bled loneliness across everything. A white sedan idled near the entrance, a bored security guard flipping through his phone. He nodded when he saw us but didn't call us over. He had that "I don't get paid for this" expression. "Shut the gate behind you if you go in," he called, not entirely looking at us. "Kids keep slipping in. I don't want to chase footprints all night." "We're not going in," Marco said. "We're just checking the caretaker's shed." The guard raised his eyebrows like that was worse and went back to his screen. We walked along the fence. The iron had taken on that wet metal smell from the earlier rain. Each time the wind shifted, the points at the top clicked, a little cloud of ticks. The shed sat just beyond the main gate off to the right, a squat rectangle of plywood and paint. Its door faced east toward a patch of graves with the older markers, the ones that lean and widen at the bottom like they were poured from the same sad mold. The padlock hung open. The door was ajar. It tapped the frame in a slow, patient rhythm. Marco looked genuinely surprised about the padlock. "Huh," he said and pushed the door. It swung easily, 2 or 3 degrees farther than it had on its own, and the hinge answered with a low groan that felt too personal, like a person waking up and deciding not to speak. Inside smelled like oil, dusty blankets, and that clean mineral scent of old concrete. There's always a little dampness in these kinds of sheds, even here. A single bulb hung from a frayed cord. It worked. The light made a familiar circle, and the edges of the room stayed disagreeable. Rakes leaned in a row like they'd just missed the bus. A plastic tub squatted under a shelf. Marco knelt by the hinge. Tasha stood covering the thermos with her hand so it wouldn't drip on the floor. "I can tighten these," Marco said, rooting in his backpack for a screwdriver. "The latch looks fine. Probably people tugging on it." We forgot the time until the guard's engine cut off and his door creaked open. His footsteps on the gravel were careful, like he was stepping on words he wasn't supposed to read. "Y'all good?" he asked from the doorway. Close up, he looked barely 20, the kind of boy who wore his hat to hide how young his face still was. "Almost done," Marco said. The guard rubbed his arm absent-mindedly, leaving tracks in the road dust on his sleeve. "You hear it sometimes," he said to no one. "People call us for it. I don't know. I tell them it's the trains. Tracks are a couple streets over." I wanted to say something to make the moment normal, but my mouth held onto silence like it belonged to it. Tasha, of course, was the one who spoke easy. "You ever hear the horse?" she asked, teasing herself for saying it. "Like hooves?" The guard's eyes flicked to the fence the way you look at a stove to check if it's still on. "Sometimes at midnight," he said. "Sound carries weird in here. Sheriff says it's kids. I don't see the kids." "I hear the thing anyway. How do you hear something and not see it?" Marco asked, squirrels already in his hands as he finished tightening the hinge. The guard shrugged. "You ever know you're being watched and then try to prove it to yourself and feel stupid? It's like that, but the opposite. You hear it and you know there's nothing there and you feel stupid for wanting to gawk." He stepped back and looked at the shed door. "Don't be here long," he added softer. "If you hear it, don't stand near the fence." Folks forget that part. We weren't planning on standing near any fence, but people are predictable when someone says don't. The shed door now latched with a more decisive click. Marco tested it twice because that's who he is. We walked out into the open and stood on the paved path where the wind has nothing to snag on, so it moves like a smooth river. "Look," Tasha said, "we're not idiots. We made it to adulthood. We can wait by the fence for like 60 seconds and then go eat tacos like God intended." Marco checked his phone. "It's 11:57, he said. Fine. 60 seconds and then you're buying salsa. The fence in front of Concordia is 2 runs of iron bars with a little gap between, thick enough for a hand or a bat to get stuck if you aren't careful. People leave flowers and little flags in the posts. Someone had tied a blue ribbon in a bow that had undone itself halfway, so it hung like a question mark without its dot. I remember stupid details when I'm nervous. The ribbon bothered me because it didn't know what it wanted to be. We lined up by the iron, shoulder to shoulder like a photo that forgot to smile. The street around us went in and out between quiet and less quiet. A car somewhere revved and then was nothing. The white sedan clicked as it cooled. The guard slid back into his seat and lit a cigarette, the ember pulsing. The moon wasn't full, but it put light on the top of the markers so they looked like they were listening. At 11:58, the wind moved through the weeds and the fence made a sound like low bells. Not ringing, not anything musical, just that soft, vibrating hum metal makes when it's touched and wants to complain about it. I pressed my palm to a bar and it was colder than the air. Cold like the inside of a pantry. Cold like something that hasn't been touched by anyone warm for a long time. We don't have to prove anything, Marco said, half joking. It's a work night. Or it was. Tasha laughed, but the laugh died fast, like a candle you try to blow out and it goes out more eagerly than it ought to. Just another minute, she said. We didn't talk after that. You don't talk when you're listening for words you don't believe in. The thing different about midnight noise here was the way it approached. You could feel it before you heard it, like someone lightly tapping the back of your skull with a spoon. The fence shivered, a vibration that came through the bars and into my hand and up my arm. You tell yourself it's wind because wind is generous like that. It'll take credit for anything. But the wind had a different tempo than that night. The tempo we felt wasn't weather. It had a repetition of patience. The first clop was far. It sounded like a hammer at a construction site a few streets over. Someone doing a job nobody bothered to tell the city about. The second clop lined up with the first in a way that made your tongue press to your teeth. The third one came from the other direction, like the sound had turned a corner in the air itself. By the fourth, the bars vibrated so deliberately that the humming wasn't random anymore. It became a tune if you were the kind of person who calls a warning a tune. I don't know if it's worse to be the only one hearing a thing or for everyone to hear it and pretend they don't. The guard had gone still in his car. A couple who had parked down the street to look tough decided they weren't tough and drove away without their engine catching on the first try. The cemetery stayed cemetery. We listened like we were sitting in church and waiting for the part where the priest says the thing that makes everyone cross themselves. When the whisper came, I thought it was Tasha at first because it sounded like someone standing where she was would sound if they spoke directly at the side of my neck. It said, "Get out before I take you too." The voice didn't have any drama to it. No echo, no grit. It was tired and mean in the way you get when you've been arguing too long with someone you love and you ran out of proof. And now there's just this bitter residue of a feeling. It was an ugly human voice. That's what I need you to understand. It didn't sound like a ghost from a story. It sounded like a person who didn't think I was one. I turned to Tasha. Her lips were pressed tight, no sound coming out. Marco's mouth was slightly open in the idiot way we sleep in cars on long trips. I looked at the guard. He was staring straight ahead. Nobody was moving. Did you hear that? I said too loud, like noise could make other noise less real. Marco swallowed. Hear what? He hadn't heard it. I could tell by the way he waited for my answer instead of bracing for his own. I looked at Tasha before I said it because I didn't want to be the only one who had to say it. She had tears in her eyes she wasn't letting fall. Not this, she whispered. Not for me. Then out loud, it's midnight. We did it, let's go. I should have listened to her. But there was that thing in me that hates being told what to do, especially by something I can't see. I stepped closer to the fence. When I did, the bars got colder under my palm, like I was touching the inside of a fridge that hadn't been opened in a while. I could see into the cemetery now, the older graves with their pieces missing, the dirt paths that look like they're still learning to be paths, a bit of the shed roof peeking behind a cypress, and nothing else, emptiness. The clops kept coming, but they didn't belong to any moving object I could point at. The empty space learned to make noise. Okay, Marco said gently, like coaxing me from a ledge. Okay, we proved our point. Let's be dumb later. When I let go of the bars, my hand left condensation as if I'd been holding a glass. I wiped it on my jeans and tried to laugh at myself, but the laugh didn't come. We went for tacos. The late-night place at the corner by the bank was still open. The kind with fluorescent lighting that makes everybody look like they're made of paper. We ate and pretended to talk about ordinary things. Tasha changed the subject every time I circled back. We dropped her off and she hugged us longer than she usually did and said, "Text me when you get home," which we never did, but that night she wanted us to. In my apartment, I turned on every light. I don't usually do that. I'm cheap with electricity, the way you get when you've had one too many reminder notices with red letters. I brushed my teeth listening to the upstairs swamp cooler clank. The mirror fogged a little from the hot water. When I wiped it with my sleeve, a smear of wetness traced a shape against the glass about the height of a person's shoulders. Condensation is a liar. It shows you what you think you see. I told myself that as I walked into my living room. I told myself again when the upstairs neighbor dropped something heavy and it hit the ceiling above me like a footstep. By the time I slept, it was already light. I dreamed of old TV shows where a horse runs across the grainy screen black and white, and the applause sign flashes even though no one's clapping. When I woke in the afternoon, my phone had a text from Tasha. "Did you sleep?" I typed back like an idiot. "You?" She sent a horse emoji again, and then I heard it at 4 a.m. Through my wall, switching to day shifts. She didn't show up to our next night shift. She switched without calling me first, which wasn't like her. But I told myself she owed me nothing. We could still eat lunch. We did twice. After the second time, she stopped answering as fast. People tiptoe out of your life without meaning to. It happens like the desert gets cold at night. It sneaks up because you forgot something could be two things at once. Marco didn't want to talk about it. He'd throw me a socket wrench and say, "Hold this," in a way that wasn't about the wrench. We tightened belts on cars that shouldn't still be running. We argued about whether the radio in his shop came in a fraction of a beat late after that night. It did. The voices were half a second behind the lips on the posters taped to the wall. That's a joke. We didn't have posters. That's me trying to make this lighter than it is. 2 weeks later, Marco called me at 3 in the morning. The call only rang twice and then went to voicemail, but there was no message. When I called back, he picked up on the first ring with a voice that had been crying, but wasn't letting me hear it. "Don't get mad," he said. I went back, just to check. The shed door was open again. "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, mad. "Because you touch things you shouldn't. And because if you said no, I'd have to listen and I didn't want to." "Is it open now?" "No," he said. "It closed as I got there. Like someone was inside who didn't want me to see." The lock was still hanging, but the door shut itself. And then I heard a voice. It wasn't the same one. It was like Mr. Salazar when he yelled at kids for climbing the fence. But he's gone. We sat in our separate darknesses, the way you do with phones when both of you are pretending there's nothing to see. "We should stop going," I said. We did the job. We tightened the hinge. Let somebody else do the stupid. "I think it's going to keep coming," he said. It did keep coming, but not just to the cemetery. That's the part I wasn't prepared for. If you'd asked me before, I would have said hauntings stay put. They're like houses without furniture. You get what's there and that's it. But the sound learned us. That's the best way I can say it. It learned the shape of our attention and came through it like a draft through a door that doesn't seal. At the grocery store, when I was wheeling a pallet of paper towels past aisle 5, I heard the clop across the polished floor, just once, and the pallet shifted an inch toward the shelf as if my hands weren't holding it. The motion sensor over the freezer clicked on like it saw something. Nothing walked out. One night when Tasha still answered my texts, she wrote that her upstairs neighbor's kid woke screaming and said a man had told him to stop pretending to be alive. The kid was 6. Kids say things. The mom told Tasha the kid had probably heard a video game through the wall. Still, Tasha bought a white noise machine and started sleeping with the bathroom fan on. A month after that, she sent me a message that said, "I'm joining my aunt in Austin for a while. I'll visit." She didn't. I tried forgetting. It's an activity you can do. You fill your day with errands. You buy screws for a shelf you haven't built yet. You walk to the gas station for milk you could have bought earlier. You tell yourself you miss Tasha because people move and that's normal. And you don't call it something following you. You label sounds as things you know. Pipes clang, trucks downshift. Cats knock things over and pretend they didn't. But forgetting is work, and some nights I clocked out late. On those nights I'd hear it again. Not a whole chorus, not a movie moment. Just a single hooffall somewhere too close to the metal stair. The barest shake of the iron railing as I climbed. the bars of my balcony humming like tuning forks someone forgot to stop. I bought a fan too. I left it on all the time. The fan made the air feel busy, so other noises had to stand in line. Around Christmas, the night store held a potluck. People brought dips and cookies and the kind of casserole that makes you wonder where the person saw the original recipe. I stood by the break room window with Marco and a new cashier, who had that soft, quick laugh that makes you feel safe. She was telling us about her aunt who collects angel figurines that all look vaguely like the aunt. "It's like being watched by her 100 times, the cashier said. "You can't even eat in peace," Marco laughed for real. He was loosening up more these days. Maybe time had pushed the night back a few inches. Maybe Tasha being gone left fewer reminders. The break room clock ticked like an accusation. The coffee machine made that sigh it does after a brew, that little whisper of burnt smell leaking out. The window gave onto the loading dock where pallets stacked up like uninteresting monuments. I was squinting through the reflection glare when I saw him. He wasn't a soldier like the tour guides say. He didn't glow. He stood by the far wall of the dock wearing ordinary jeans and a jacket I've seen 100 men wear to HEB in cold weather. He was a little hunched like people get when they've learned to pick up boxes without wrecking their backs. He looked at the wall, not at me. When he turned his head, the motion lagged just a hair behind the head itself like an old webcam. And then he was gone. "What?" Marco asked. He'd seen my face. "Nothing," I said. "And I meant it the way you mean it when you spilled a drink and nobody saw and you hope it dries before anyone notices." That night, the hooffall came twice in my apartment and didn't try to pretend to be plumbing. The second one shook the window enough that the cheap plastic blinds clicked, a brittle little sound that made me angry because it was so small. I stood in the living room and said, "Leave me alone," and felt stupid and brave at the same time. The fridge's compressor kicked on like an answer. I lasted like that until spring. On the first warm day, the kind that makes you think the city's skin is young again, I ran into the security guard from the cemetery at a coffee stand outside the hardware store. He looked older in daylight, not in his face but in the way he carried his shoulders like a pack without straps was on him. He recognized me too. "You still go out there?" he asked. Not with accusation but with a softness that meant he was bracing me for a no. "I don't," I said. "You?" He shook his head. "Got a different site," he said. "I asked for it. The guy who took my spot, he says it's just a job. He says the hooves are coyotes." I didn't argue. "Coyotes don't sound like metal," I said. "Nothing sounds like metal unless it touches it," he said. "That's what the old caretaker told me once. He said if you hear something that's not there shaking the fence, it means it knows the shape of where it wants to be. It means it's practicing." "Practicing what?" I asked. He looked over my shoulder like the sun was telling him something. "Being," he said. "Don't tell me if you hear it somewhere else. I don't want to know." The idea of a thing practicing took root in a part of my head I didn't know was garden. Practice means repetition. Repetition means a path being worn. Paths mean eventually you don't have to think where you're going. You just go. In late May, Marco quit the shop. He said he needed something with hours that didn't follow him into his dreams. He took a delivery job that put him in sunlight more. He got browner, happier, louder. He didn't call me at 3 in the morning anymore. We saw each other weekends like normal people. Sometimes we avoided Concordia by name. "Let's not go down that way. Traffic." I went past Concordia just once that summer, on my way to pick up a part they only had at a store on the far side. It was noon. The sun wore everything down to its honest outline. The iron fence looked ordinary asleep. A group of tourists stood by the gate listening to a man in a hat talk with his hands. They smiled and pointed at a brochure. There was no hum, no voice. The rider, if we're calling it that, was at lunch or on someone else's route. I kept my windows up and let the AC work too hard. I checked my rearview mirror more than I needed to. The next night, I remember because I'd just gotten to sleep and the world still had that thin, early sleep sheen. The fan in my bedroom clicked off. Power blinked. The apartment went silent in that way that is louder than noise. I sat up. In the window, my reflection hovered over the apartment complex's dark. Streetlights were out too. The stairwell had no emergency light. I could see my own eyes, small and unsure. The glass reflected the room behind me like a ghost of a ghost. And the reflection spoke. It wasn't my voice. It was the tired, mean voice from the fence using my mouth and not needing it. But it didn't say the same words. It said Marco and then it said Tasha. Not a warning. Not a threat. Just the names, as if reading the attendance sheet. I didn't move. The power came back. The fan whirred. The reflection returned to being an honest liar. I called Marco that morning and told him I wanted to show him something stupid, and he told me he was on a route and would swing by after noon. We sat on my couch with the TV playing a cooking show we ignored. I told him what I'd heard. He believed me because he has always believed me even when I didn't deserve it. We didn't say her name too loud. He put his hand on my shoulder like you do for a dog when thunder happens. He said, "We can go talk to a priest, or a therapist, or both. I don't care which order." "I don't think it matters what we call it," I said. "I think it wants to be called at all." We didn't go to the cemetery again. I'm saying that because I know how these stories usually go. We didn't stand by the fence waiting for more. We didn't invite it. We did everything small and practical people do. We changed routines. I moved my bed away from the window. I taught myself to listen less. It helped, or I told myself it did. The hoof-falls came rarely after that. When they did, they were far away and tired. 2 weeks ago, I woke to my phone buzzing angrily on the nightstand. It was from a number I didn't recognize. The voicemail transcription said silence. But when I pressed play, there was an ocean of static and then the sound of a wooden door settling in its frame. The soft thump the sound hinges make when they decide where they want to rest. Then a whisper. "Get out before I take you too." The voice wasn't aimed at me. It was talking to the room it was in. At the end, very faint, I heard the hum of metal like someone had touched a fence and taken their hand away. Before it learned the shape of them, I saved the message and haven't played it again. Yesterday, a mutual friend told me Tasha came back to El Paso. She's working days at a clinic on the west side. She walks to work when she can because she says the air here, even when it's hot, feels like something you can do. I wanted to call her. I put her name into my phone and let it sit. Then I saw the news about a boy who went missing near Montana, and my brain did that unhelpful thing where it ties strings that aren't tied. I didn't call her. I smiled at the part where the sun pushed through the afternoon dust and shaped the mountains like shadows on a curtain. Last night, after wanting to call and not calling, I stood in my kitchen making tea like old people do when their brains pace. The kettle whistled and I turned it off and let it complain itself into quiet. The window over the sink is a blackboard at night. You can see yourself if you want to, or you can look just to the left of yourself if you prefer. I looked in the dark and saw my cheekbones and an untidy man and a plant I forgot to water. I also saw for a second a man behind me wearing a jacket I've seen 100 times in grocery stores. He wasn't a soldier. He didn't want anything noble. He wanted to stand where I stand and learn the shape of the room the way I learned the shape of the fence. I turned around and there was no one, because of course there was no one. But the window kept a pale version of him while my eyes adjusted. The kettle clicked as the metal cooled. That tiny noise sounded like hooves if you let it. I didn't let it, but the sound didn't ask me for permission. I don't care if anyone believes me. I'm not trying to file a report. I'm writing this because I think names matter. And once the thing has learned them, it becomes difficult to be a person in the shape of your own life. If you go to Concordia, if you stand by that iron fence because boredom and fear dress like courage when you're tired, don't touch the bars. Don't put your ear where you think a whisper lives. Don't wait for exactly midnight like a fool. It doesn't show up for the clock. It shows up for the attention. Maybe it's only the cemetery. Maybe it's stuck there like stories are. Maybe the guy in the window was just me, doubling. Maybe Tasha will text me tomorrow and tell me she dreamed horses and then laugh and ask when I'm free for lunch. Maybe Marco will say it's all coyotes and tired breakfast and show up anyway and borrow a wrench. Or maybe the next time the power takes a breath in the middle of the night, the thing that used to be a rider and isn't anymore will practice again in my kitchen. Maybe it will say a new name to see how it fits. Maybe it will say yours. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to tell you to get out before it takes you too. But I don't know which direction is out. And that's the part that keeps me up when the fan clicks and the window turns into a mirror, and the fence hum starts very low, like a voice I'm supposed to recognize, reminding me there are places where the world is thin and it is learning us patiently, one small sound at a time. I never thought I'd write this where strangers could read it, but the memory keeps knocking around in my head at night like a loose shutter. I live a few blocks from Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. If you know the area, you know how the afternoons can turn quiet in a way that doesn't sound like New York. No honking, just the wind through old trees and a distant hammer from a row house renovation. That quiet is what I used to love about walking my dog, Winnie, along the perimeter and sometimes, don't judge me, cutting in when the gates were still open but the last grounds truck had gone. I've always liked old places. I liked reading the little flags on the Civil War stones, the tiny rusted holders that say Gar, the coins on certain markers that I told myself meant someone remembered someone. The weird part of the story isn't that I went inside. It's everything after. It started on a day that felt like two seasons were arguing. It was early June, but the air out by Fifth Avenue had that metallic taste that means lightning is looking for a place to land. I'd had a long week at the bike shop, dealing with a shipment that arrived with half the boxes crushed. My sister Jess had been after me to not sit alone because it was the first anniversary of my ex moving out. She meant well, but I told her I was fine and took Winnie out around 6. We cut down 23rd Street, past the deli with the postcard rack out front, and came up on the Gothic arch near 25th. The clouds were stacked like bruises. A groundskeeper in a faded green jacket was locking the small side gate. I gave him one of those chin nods. He looked at the sky, then at me and Winnie, and said, "Storm rises fast here, like the cemetery made its own." "I'll be quick," I said. He shrugged, told me to stick to the main lane and be out before the big drop. I said thanks and slipped in. I know that sounds reckless. It didn't back then. A lot of people walk in there. You go quiet. You watch Winnie sniff stone and grass and you think about names on marble from 100 years ago. And if they thought they'd still be read. I only went over toward the Civil War section because Winnie tugged left. The little flags fluttered. You know how the air goes still right before a storm, like it doesn't want to give anything away? It was like that. I checked the time. I still wore a watch then. A cheap one my dad had given me when he couldn't afford a new one for himself. And I figured I had 20 minutes before the rain reached me. Down by the low slope of the Civil War lot, I started seeing the weird mud. Greenwood has paths and trimmed grass. It doesn't usually have patches of tacky mud unless someone's dug something up. These patches had a brown-black shine to them. Winnie slowed and pressed herself against my leg. Her tail went down like a drawbridge. And then, this is going to sound like I'm pushing it, but I swear I heard a drum, not a full marching band. Just one drum rolling a quiet rhythm a kid could practice in a bedroom. I stopped to listen. The sky grumbled. Winnie stared at nothing, her head cocked like she was listening too. A gust bent the flag so they all pointed one direction, like rows of small hands indicating a path. I told myself it was the wind messing with sound. Cemeteries amplify things. My phone buzzed. "Jess, want company tonight? I'll bring pizza." I typed, "Maybe later," and put the phone back. When I looked up, there was a man standing about 30 feet ahead near one of the larger stones, the kind with a marble urn carved on top. He wasn't facing me. He had that posture of someone waiting for a bus that isn't posted on any schedule. I remember his hat, which looked like an old style that would get you laughed at in most places. Flat top, short brim, slightly slouching. I only have names for it now because I looked them up later. A forage cap. He didn't turn when I said hey. Winnie didn't growl, didn't bark. She just leaned into my leg so hard I had to adjust my balance. "Park's closing," I tried. He lifted his head like maybe he'd heard, then started moving, not toward me, not away from me, but kind of parallel, following the line of markers down the slope. His walk was odd. I want to be careful here because my brain was primed to see things. It was raining maybe 2 miles away. You could smell the wet. The air felt charged. The man walked like he was walking uphill even though he wasn't. A step, a pause, weight shifted onto the other leg. You see that gait in people who've spent a day standing in one spot. When he got to the bottom of the slope without ever looking at me, he turned and went between two cedars. He didn't disappear. It wasn't theatrical. He just went behind them, and when I came closer, he wasn't on the other side. Lightning flashed to the south without thunder. That's the kind that gets me nervous. I told Winnie, "Okay, we're done." We cut back toward the main lane. That's when I saw the mud on my boots. It was caked in the treads thick as paste. The weird thing wasn't that it was muddy. The weird thing was that the ground under me was mostly dry. The storm hadn't hit yet. The patches of brown-black mud had looked tacky, but I hadn't stepped in any. At least I didn't think so. I stopped under an oak and used a stick to gouge out the mud. It smeared like wet clay. It smelled like something turned under a long time ago. I know dirt. This smelled older than any garden. The first fat drop started when we reached the arch. The groundskeeper had the small side gate pulled open and waved me through. "You cut it close," he said. His voice sounded like a match scraped on a rough surface. I wanted to ask him if he'd seen the man with the hat, but the rain doubled in volume the way summer rain does, and we both ran for it. I hit Fifth Avenue with water already on my neck. By the time we reached home, my socks left prints in the hallway, and Winnie shook herself by the stairs like she'd held the whole storm in her fur. I put her towel in front of the door, took my boots off, and saw that mud again, stuck in the seams. It had thinned out in the rain, but the color stayed wrong. I scraped what I could and dumped it into the sink, then thought better of it and pushed it into a paper bag. I don't know why. It felt like a bad idea to send it into the pipes. Jess called around 8. "I'm downstairs with a pie from Luigi's," she said, like she knew if she asked permission I might say no. She buzzed up and did the sister thing where she looks at your face first, registers your mood, then pretends she isn't doing that. We ate on the coffee table with plates balanced on our knees. The storm was stalled overhead. Lightning came and went like someone was taking flash photos through the curtains. I told her the gist. Man in old hat, weird mud, a faint drum, I probably imagined. I don't tell Jess half of the stuff I think about. She's the rational one. She listened. "Civil War section?" she asked. She took a slice and pressed the point down so the oil ran back toward the crust like she always does. "Yeah, near the slope where the little flags are." "I've heard things," she said, and I laughed at her tone. "No, seriously. A mom from the playground said her father used to work maintenance there. He said the storms do weird acoustics on the old bronze vases. You get humming. People think it's music." "That makes sense," I said, relieved at how much it actually did. I told her about the mud. She wrinkled her nose. "Don't keep that," she said. "You're ridiculous about souvenirs." "I'm not keeping it," I said, gesturing at the paper bag. "It's going out with the trash." We watched a thunderhead break and reform on the horizon. She told me about a fight with her landlord, about my niece's obsession with horse stickers, about someone in her building who vacuumed at 2 a.m. I almost forgot the cemetery. Right before she left, she took the trash bag down to the bin. I stood at the window and watched the rain fizz under the streetlight. When I turned away, something wet had seeped from the bottom of the paper bag and made a dark crescent on the counter. I wiped it up and didn't think about it for the rest of the night. The next morning was blue and apologetic. The city wakes up like a sleeper who overslept. I opened every window. The apartment smelled clean. Winnie clattered around with her nails tapping the hardwood. I made coffee and checked my phone. 2 missed calls from an unknown number at 2:17 a.m. with no voicemail. A text from Jess at 1:08. "Let me know if the thunder keeps you up." I typed back that I'd slept fine even though I hadn't. Sometime after midnight, I'd heard the drum again, slow, practice quiet, not enough to complain about to a neighbor. Enough that I stood in the kitchen with the lights off and tried to figure out the direction. It had seemed to come from the sink, which didn't make sense. The plumbing moans sometimes, but it doesn't keep a beat. At the shop, we got slammed. It felt like every person with a fixed gear and a guilt complex had decided to commute on a day when the subway was actually running fine. My coworker Mateo and I tag-teamed flat tires and bent derailleurs, while our boss yelled from the back that the supplier had shorted us again. Around 3, the clouds thickened the exact color they'd been the day before. Mateo said, "Round 2?" And we both laughed, but not comfortably. I told him about the guy in the cemetery, expecting an eye roll. He surprised me by saying, "My uncle used to say don't look people in the eyes in Greenwood after a storm or they'll follow you home." He meant living people, he added, then paused. "Mostly." I left at 6 with a half-finished tune-up on the stand and a promise to come in early. I shouldn't have detoured past the cemetery, but I did. Call it superstition. People go back to the place where they saw something to convince themselves they didn't. The gates were open. Tourists moved like a slow school of fish under umbrellas. The Civil War section looked like any place after rain. Grass flattened, paths darkened, the little flags now glamorously bright against everything else. I kept to the lane. I didn't cut down to the slope. Even from the road, though, I could see marks in the softer ground. Not footprints exactly, not shovels. Long, shallow indentations spaced about as far apart as a person's stride. You could make them if you pressed the flat of a board into wet earth and then lifted it. I saw 3 or 4 of those lines leading from the lower graves up toward the cedars where the man had gone. I told myself it was dragged branches. I told myself a lot of things. I got home before the second storm hit. I live on the second floor, and my downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Rosen, was standing in the hallway with her grocery bag like she'd decided on the stairs that they were heavier than she'd planned for. I took the bag for her and we did the weather small talk. Winnie wagged her whole body at her. Mrs. Rosen adores Winnie and calls her Winnie the Pooh no matter how many times I tell her my dog is not a bear. "You heard the drumming last night?" she asked over her shoulder as I set the bag on her kitchen counter. "I thought I imagined that," I said. "Where's it coming from?" "From where it always comes from," she said, like I'd missed an obvious life lesson. "The cemetery makes noise. They drilled it into the kids when I was little. Don't run there in a thunderstorm. My father said there were stories from his father. I didn't listen, did you?" She smiled. "You're young." "I'm 32, I said. "You're young," she said again and patted my arm. "Keep your umbrella by the door tonight." That night, the rain was different. It came in thin lines like a beaded curtain. You could hear each drop as an individual decision. I sat on the couch with a book I didn't read and let the TV do that silent flicker on some news station. Winnie slept with her head on my foot, then woke up and stared at the kitchen doorway. Not at the door, not at the floor. At that doorway. The drum started again, soft, practiced. It rolled a pattern that fell into my breathing. I tried to convince myself it was the people upstairs. Maybe their kid had a drum pad. Then the overhead light buzzed once and dimmed like a hand had pinched the electricity to check if it was real. The clock on the stove blinked 12 km even though it was only a little after 9. Thunder moved like furniture upstairs. I said Winnie's name. She kept staring at the doorway until she let out one low note that wasn't a bark. It was a stay-away sound. The banging that followed wasn't a drum. It was steps on the hallway stairs. Someone heavy in wet shoes. 3 steps, then a pause, then 3 more as if the person was carrying something. They stopped at my floor. I put my book down and stood, feeling dumb because it's just stairs, it's just a neighbor. It's just the weather making your nerves play games. A shadow slid under my door, the way shadows do when the hall light is on and someone passes close. No knock, no key in the lock. Just the slow step of someone walking past and then the whisper thump of the downstairs door. Winnie let out another low tone and then went silent, as if she'd been told to hush by someone she listened to. I didn't sleep. The drum came and went. Not always at the same volume or pace. Sometimes it would stop and I'd relax, and then a roll would come again like a throat cleared before speaking. At 1:36 a.m., my phone lit up my night table. Unknown number. I answered because I was in that state where anything might prove the world is regular. A click like an old connection, then the hush of a big room. In the background, distant thunder. If you've lived in New York long enough, you can tell city echo from room echo. This was an indoor sound. I said hello twice. No one answered, but the drum on the line synced to the drum I thought I was hearing in the apartment, and for a second, I couldn't tell which was which. Then the call dropped. I stared at the call-ended screen until it blacked out, then lay awake until dawn. On Friday, Jess insisted on stopping by the shop. She brought me a bagel and poked around like she does when she's bored. She likes to touch things with purpose, like a detective on a show. She watched me adjust a brake cable and then said way too casually, "You look like boiled pasta." "Up all night," I said, keeping my head down. Storm, she said. "And our little Civil War drummer boy?" "Don't make it cute," I said. She sobered. Jess is good at teasing until a line presents itself, then she steps back. "Come stay at my place tonight," she said. "Charlie's with his dad this weekend and I'm promised to a bottle of red and a rerun. I'll spare you both." "I have Winnie," I said. "She can come," Jess said. "She likes my couch more than you do." She wasn't wrong. I closed up around 8 and carried Winnie up the few blocks to Jess's place because the pavement was still slick and Winnie was shaking as if she'd picked up my mood. The rain had paused. The sky had that washed pink of a city trying to look innocent. Jess made pasta. We watched something stupid and I actually forgot for a couple of hours. I was halfway through a story about a customer who wanted me to install a child seat on a bike that couldn't safely hold one when Jess paused the TV and tilted her head. "Hear that?" she asked. I wanted to say no, but I did. Not a drum this time. Not quite. A noise like many feet stepping at the exact same time far away. If you've ever been under a subway platform when the station above you fills and people all shift weight at once, you know the sound. We sat there not speaking and listened to a thing that could have been pipes, Could have been nothing. Then Jess stood up and went to her bedroom. She came back with a shoebox. "Don't laugh," she said, and pulled out a small metal object. It was a token. Old. It had a hole punched through it like the subway tokens from before Metro cards. On one side, an eagle with a shield. On the other, a wreath and the words Greenwood Cemetery, Lot 748. It looked too real to be a souvenir and too plain to be valuable. "Charlie found it in the dirt by the chain link near the fence last spring," Jess said. "I told him to put it back, but he didn't. I took it later. I was going to return it and forgot." "You kept a random thing from a cemetery," I said, because it was easier to focus on that than on the foot noise slowly pacing the edge of sound. "I did the wrong thing," she said. She put it back in the box. "We can take it back tomorrow morning at the earliest. I'm not walking in there in the dark. Even you aren't that dumb." I took the box and quickly put the lid back on, like covering it would hush whatever we were feeling. We slept in the living room. Winnie curled between us on the rug. The storm, when it came after midnight, seemed as if it gets stuck on the building, hammering the same section of roof until I thought it would make a hole. I woke to the sound of a metal object rolling and tapped, then rolling, like a coin spinning and then falling on its face. I reached for the shoebox, felt its weight wrong. The lid had shifted. I sat up. Jess was awake too, very still. We both heard a small clink from the hallway, like something light had hit the baseboard. I don't know if I said her name or if I said don't, but neither of us moved for a full minute. The next flash of lightning strobed the whole room. In that brief, bright wash, I saw Winnie staring at the doorway to the hall, the same way she had stared at my kitchen doorway. The token was on the floor against the wall, not where we'd left it. We waited until morning like sailors wait for daylight. Coffee tasted like medicine. We walked to Greenwood right when the gates opened at 7. The air was washed and humid. Birds were loud. People passed us with cameras. We carried the shoebox like it held something alive. The groundskeeper from the other day was there, the same green jacket, his cap damp at the brim. He looked at the box, then at me, then at Jess, and said, "Come on," in a tone that suggested he'd had enough of everyone's ghosts for one career. He led us to a small building off to the side, a tool shed, but not shabby, the kind with a neat desk and a wall calendar still on last month. A small radio sat on the shelf, turned low, the news murmuring about traffic on the BQE. He took the token out and turned it with his thumb and forefinger. "Lot numbers don't mean much to visitors," he said. "Means something to us. People take these when the holders break or when they fall out of the little boxes during storms. Sometimes they show up at the maintenance desk. Sometimes they don't." "We were going to bring it back," Jess said quickly. "Well, we are bringing it back," he nodded, unbothered. "They find their way. Storms shake things loose." He put it on the desk as if the token had been trying all week to get there. Then he looked at me like he was deciding. "You saw him," he said, not as a question. "The hat." "I saw a guy," I said, defensive and embarrassed all at once. "They walk strange," he said. He tapped his shin. "Boots, narrow heels. After a day in them, you move like you still hear commands. I've worked here 31 years. Storms do something to the ground. That's the best I can say." He walked to a file cabinet, pulled out a drawer, and fetched a laminated page with tiny type. "Lot 748, he said. "Huh." He showed us a list of names. "I won't write them here. It feels wrong." He ran a finger down and stopped. "Drummer," he said. "There you go." "That doesn't prove anything," Jess said, but she moved closer. "No, it doesn't," he said. "You want proof, you need a different job than mine. Best I can offer is this: if the storm is going to be bad, stay inside. If you bring anything home, bring it back." He put the token in a small envelope and labeled it. Then he looked out the window toward the Civil War section and added softer, "Don't look them in the face if you can help it. They want things." Names called, drums answered, footsteps echoed. That's people. You listen too hard to any one thing. You find yourself walking where it leads. You don't want to walk where that leads. We thanked him. I felt silly. I also felt watched in a way that made me keep my focus on the gravel under my shoes. We didn't go down to the slope. We left by the big arch and went to get bagels like normal people. The day went back to being a day. The only off part was that my watch had stopped. The hands were frozen at 9:12, the same time I had looked at it the first day before the storm hit. I tapped the face and it started again. It would stop and start like that for the next week whenever thunder threatened. I would replace the battery and it would do it again. You can end the story there if you want. You can say a guy saw a person in a hat, heard some thunder mix with a metal vase, and spooked himself because it was the anniversary of an empty apartment. You can take the version where a token got knocked out of a shoebox in the night by a draft. I'd be happy if I could keep that version. I mean that. But on Sunday I took Winnie for a walk around noon. No rain scheduled, blue as a postcard. We stopped at the little cafe on 20th for iced coffee. On the way back I saw mud on Winnie's paws, the same brown-black smear from that first day. I wiped it with a napkin and it smeared like wet clay. We hadn't gone near the cemetery. That night, when I put my boots by the door, water pooled under them. Not a lot, enough to leave a mark that dried into a faint foot shape. The next morning, the hallway had a damp smell like wool hung too long without sun. Mrs. Rosen called through the door that there was a drip in the wall and asked if I had any leaks. I didn't. The building super came and shone a flashlight in the closet and found nothing. The wet ring on the floor under my boots refused to evaporate until I opened the window and propped the door with a book, the way my dad used to do to let the house breathe. On Wednesday, I changed my route. I started taking Winnie north away from Greenwood, toward the high school and the mural of the sparrow with the keys in its beak. It didn't matter. The drum still came sometimes at night. I moved the radio from the kitchen to the living room and left it on low like the groundskeeper did, hoping a human voice would keep other things quiet. It helped on nights without lightning. On nights with lightning, the radio went to static that rolled in time with a pattern I didn't want to name. 2 weeks ago, during a storm that ran the length of the Verrazzano like a zipper, I made the mistake of standing by the kitchen window and watching the gates of Greenwood through a hallway of trees and traffic. A flash lit the arch like someone had taken a black and white photo of it. In that washed instant, I saw a small line moving through the alley inside the wall. You can map people's motion at a distance. Tourists are scatter. Joggers are steady beads. This was different. A handful of silhouettes in a narrow file. No guns, I'm not claiming that. No flags. Just the particular angle of heads tilted down against rain. A drumbeat that could have been my heartbeat, could have been the super's upstairs sink, could have been a rhythm that traveled in wet air. I stepped back and my heel hit something on the floor and sent it spinning. My watch, which I'd taken off because it felt heavy in the humidity, spun like a coin and clinked the baseboard before falling flat. When I picked it up, the hands were at 9:12 again. I haven't walked inside the cemetery since. I haven't walked on that side of the street during rain. I keep the radio on low at night. Jess says I should see someone. Mateo says I should go in on a bright day and reset my brain. Mrs. Rosen says to put salt by the door and then told me she never said that because her daughter tells her not to be superstitious. The groundskeeper, when I saw him smoking by the gate one clear afternoon, tipped his chin at me like someone who recognizes someone else's story without needing the details. I gave him the same nod back. Storm's coming, he said, though the sky was clean. I said I knew. The weather app disagreed with both of us. It rained at 2. Last week I woke up at 2:17 a.m. to my phone lit in the dark. Unknown number, I answered with my voice held steady. The line was empty except for a soft hollow like someone standing in a large room where the ceiling is high and the walls are stone. In the background, far but clear, there was the sound of feet shifting all at once. It could have been rain batting the fire escape. It could have been a modem from 1998. It could have been many things. I said, without planning to, I don't know any of your names. The call stayed open for 7 seconds, maybe 8. Then, very gently, like someone tapping a table to test if the varnish has cured, a stick hit a drum exactly once, the kind of tap you make to ask if someone is listening. The landlord put new weather stripping on the back door downstairs last month, but there's still a draft that sneaks under at night when the pressure drops. It pushes against my apartment door in a soft exhale that sounds like a person leaning in to say a name. I'm not claiming it's my name. I'm not claiming anything. I'm just telling you that every time thunder stacks up over the river and the flags on the small stones all point one way, the mud finds my shoes again. And if I forget to face my boots toward the door, the wet footprint they leave in the morning faces the hall instead of the threshold, like a person changed their mind in the night and decided to stay a little longer. I'm not trying to scare anyone, but I need to put this somewhere before I start convincing myself it was just sleep debt and LA weirdness. I took a second job last year because rent did its usual thing, crept up while my pay stayed still. My day job is boring data entry in a building with windows that don't open. The night job was at Hollywood Forever Cemetery. If you've been in LA, you've probably driven past it on Santa Monica. They do outdoor movies in the summer. People picnic on blankets and watch classics projected against a mausoleum wall. It's oddly cozy when there's a crowd. When there isn't, when it's just a few security. People spread across 100 acres of old stones and palms in that shallow lake where the birds nest when it's 2 or 3 in the morning. That place feels like a radio station between frequencies. There's a hiss you can't hear until you pay attention, and then you can't stop hearing it. I worked the Friday and Saturday overnight shifts, midnight to 6. It wasn't even security in the way you picture it. No weapons, no hero stuff. Mostly golf cart patrols and making sure nobody hopped a fence, nobody was sleeping on a stone bench, nobody left a candle burning. We had 2 radios and a boxy flashlight with a weak battery that you had to slap to get the beam solid again. The job sounded like a joke until you did it. I wasn't alone. My buddy Luis snagged the job first and got me in. He liked the quiet and the free time to study for his electrician certification. He'd park his cart by the little chapel, lay his textbook on the steering wheel, and circle every half hour. Our supervisor was a woman named Sylvia, who had the tired, sharp humor of someone who had listened to security guards complain for 20 years. Nights added up to a handful of people. Me, Luis, a guy named Rob who smoked like it was a competition, and a groundskeeper named Dennis who came in early with a thermos and a leaf blower across his lap, like it was a pet. That's who I considered the main cast. Background characters drifted in and out. A couple of LAPD patrols liked to roll through around 2:30 with the windows down, just to say hi and see if any gates had mysteriously unlatched themselves. The first night that mattered was a Saturday, July heat. One of those nights that smell like warm asphalt and watered grass. The movie crowd had cleared out around 11, earlier than usual because a marine layer was sneaking in and people don't like damp blankets. By midnight, the big lawn looked abandoned, just flattened ovals where families had sat. There was a piece of red ribbon caught on a palm frond, fluttering weakly in air that wasn't moving. At 1:13, a motion sensor pinged on the monitor in the office. They're ancient little boxes that throw a timestamp over gray video like a cheap TV station. I was in the chair by the screen, drinking coffee that tasted like brown water. The motion was near the corridor of mausoleums behind the chapel. Sylvia said, "Take a look," and I said, "Copy," and grabbed the flashlight. People think cemeteries at night are pitch black. They're not. There's this patchwork of sodium lamps and moonlight, and then places where it goes blind between trees like someone draped fabric. The corridor looked like a slot cut through marble and shadow. Names in gold letters on both sides. The air smelled like lilies even though there hadn't been a funeral there that day. I eased down the corridor. My footsteps sounded too loud. It's always like that at first. You get used to it. I flashed the light left, then right. I checked the doors. All locked. I remember thinking the stone felt warmer than it should under my palm. I told Sylvia on the radio it was all quiet, and she said, "Roger, come back." And I kept walking because I had that stubborn feeling I get sometimes. Like if I turn around without finishing, I'll invite bad luck. Nothing happened. Not then. I walked out the other side and into the open. The night looked like it had just shrugged. I went back to the office and Luis looked up from his book and said, "Ghosts?" This was an ongoing joke. "They're on a smoke break," I said. We listened to Dennis's old AM radio grumble at the edge of an oldies station. Sylvia wrote something down in a logbook with a purple pen. The applause started a week later. It was 3 in the morning, the dead hour, the slot where nights get thin. I was on the far side by the lake, parked with my cart facing the water. I could see the Paramount wall past the trees, that weird feeling of being next to something famous when you're in the dark. I was texting my sister, who doesn't sleep like a normal person and always answers late-night messages with memes. That's when I heard it. Light, quick clapping like the end of a student recital. It came from behind me, somewhere in the corridor area. I didn't move for a good 10 seconds. I waited to hear if it was something normal. A car door snapping shut on Santa Monica. Somebody dropping something in a dumpster. It wasn't. It was clapping again, this time a little louder, a little longer. "Hey, you hear that?" I asked on the radio. Luis came back a second later. "Hear what?" "Clapping." "Clapping?" Rob's voice chimed in and dragged on the word like it tasted weird. I let go of the radio button because I didn't want to sound like I was pranking them. I drove toward it. The applause got clearer. It had that empty gym quality, the slap of sound in a hard space. I pulled up near the corridor and killed the cart. It was still going. It rose and fell like a wave. It was not a crowd. It was the kind of applause you'd hear in a small theater, polite and enthusiastic. I walked into the corridor. The air felt wrong. I don't know a better way to put it. It was like the temperature dropped 2 degrees, and like I'd walked under a humming transformer. The flashlight beam wobbled because my hand did. The clapping got quieter and then stopped. I stood there breathing, hand on a brass handle, and realized something was weird with the air itself, like when you stare at asphalt on a hot day and the distance turns into water. It was subtle. If I looked directly at it, I couldn't see it. Off to the side, the air above the floor rippled. Then something impossible happened in the most boring way. I blinked, and for a half second I thought I saw shapes at the far end of the corridor. People. Not even scary people. Just silhouettes in dark clothes lined up like a little audience. Faces I couldn't resolve. A dull shimmer like they were behind heat waves. I took a step and the beam flicked, and when the light steadied, there was nothing there. I'm not pretending I was a hero. My mouth tasted like pennies. I backed away a step at a time until I was out of the corridor and back in the open air like a swimmer breaking the surface. I did what you do. I tried to make it normal. I told myself it was an echo. The Cinespia screenings had been that night. Maybe the leftover crowd noise had bounced weird. I told Sylvia, who narrowed her eyes at me like she was deciding whether to say the things she didn't want to say. Some guards say they hear that sometimes. Audience ghosts, she said, then grimaced like it sounded stupid in her mouth. It's an old story. Don't go looking for it. That's easy to say to someone whose brain is not shaped like mine. Once you think you've heard applause with no people, every minute of quiet after 3 a.m. dares you to go see if it's there again. I brought it up with the others during our half-asleep conversations. Rob said he'd heard something like it his first month and decided it was poplar leaves clapping against each other in the breeze, which is the kind of explanation you invent to keep your teeth from chattering. Louise said he'd never heard it, which made me feel crazier. Dennis, who didn't usually talk about anything except the Dodgers and carburetors, surprised me by saying, "There used to be a guard, long time back, named Earl. He recorded it. Cassette tape. Played it for people." "Sylvia, you remember?" Sylvia rolled her eyes. "I remember. And I remember I told him to stop bringing that thing to work. He scared interns. Got it on tape?" I asked. My voice came out tighter than I meant. "Don't," Sylvia said. "This place collects stories. Keep it boring," I tried. I really did. I was fine for a few nights. Then I made the mistake of telling my sister, Maya. She's the curious one in the family. The one who used to go down rabbit holes on Wikipedia and emerge 3 hours later with 10 tabs open and a half-baked plan to start a podcast. She asked if she could come by one night to bring me food because she was trying a new recipe. It's technically against the rules to have visitors, but we bent that sometimes if they stayed by the gate. I told her sure, a quick drop-off, and felt a little better, because I was going to show this to someone who would either confirm it or laugh me out of my own head. She came around too with a Tupperware container of rice and vegetables. The sky had that washed-out LA look, where it's not exactly cloudy but you can't see stars. Maya put the food on my cart and said, "You look tired," because sisters are contractually obligated to say that. I told her about the applause and she said, "Right now?" I said, "Maybe." The thing with it is that it didn't respond to anything. It was like a radio show that started when it wanted. We didn't hear anything at first, which was almost worse. The silence felt like we were waiting outside a bathroom door, listening for the fan. I drove the cart toward the corridor. Maya kicked the toe of her sneaker against the dash, and I told her to stop because the cart was held together by the security tape equivalent of duct tape. When we parked, we could hear the peacocks across the grounds doing their phantom scream thing. If you've never heard peacocks at night, imagine a child yelling the word help because they're bored. That noise is the only thing I can think of that makes a cemetery more unsettling after midnight. We walked into the corridor. I felt foolish as soon as we stepped under the marble entry. "It's quieter here," Maya whispered, and I didn't know if she was reassuring me or herself. I panned the flashlight along the names. Some were famous. Some were not. The air did the shimmer again. faint enough that I told myself it was my contacts drying out. Then we heard it, soft clapping from behind us where the corridor opened to the lawn. We turned together. The corridor is narrow enough that turning at the same time made our shoulders bump. And I remember the little apology smile we gave each other even while the hair on my neck was standing up so hard it hurt. There was no one there. The applause was there, though, a polite wave rolling over stone. It seemed to move away as soon as we moved toward it, like it was keeping a distance the way a skittish dog will, trotting 2 steps ahead no matter how fast you walk. We got to the end and it was stronger, cleaner. Something about the acoustics. Maya looked like she was going to say something and didn't. The clapping went on for what felt like a full minute. Then it faded, leaving the peacock cries at the edge and the hum of the street. Maya said, That's not an echo. We should go, I said. That was me trying to keep it boring like Sylvia wanted. We started back, and it was only because my brain was looking for it that I noticed the shimmer in the air again. More obvious now. A space the size of a door at the midpoint of the corridor, like heat above a grill. I didn't tell Maya. I pretended not to see it. I could almost phrase it into something ordinary. Maybe there's a vent? But there was no breeze, and the smell of lilies got stronger in that spot, the way scents will intensify in an elevator. Do you see that? Maya asked, and I said, nope, with the exact amount of fake nonchalance that makes someone look harder. She reached out like she was going to put her hand in it. I grabbed her wrist, which made her jump, which made me jump. We were a mess. We stepped to the side. The shimmer didn't move with us. It stayed where it was, like a slice of hot July air installed in the wrong month. The radio clicked in my pocket, and hearing Sylvia's voice was like getting your balance back on a moving bus. Everything good? She said. Yeah, I said too fast. Maya stared down the corridor. Her voice got small. I'm hearing it again. It was faint now, like clapping through drywall. A slow, patient rhythm. It did the same thing as before, stayed just ahead as we walked, never letting us find the person doing it. We made it back to the cart and left. Maya's shoulder stayed tight. She kept the Tupperware container clutched like a purse in a bad neighborhood. When we got back to the gate, she said, I'm going to pretend that was a weird acoustic thing. I'm also going to text you later and ask you to send me a recording. I told her I wasn't going to, because if I recorded it, I felt like it would mean it existed. That was the wrong superstition to pick. A week later, my phone died around 2 and I used my backup battery that I always forgot to charge fully. Luis had loaned me a spare radio because our regular one had a sticky push to talk. I'd parked my cart where I could see the corridor and the chapel, and the line of dark cypress in a row like a parade that forgot to move. There are moments at that hour where everything feels staged, like you could reach out and pinch the sky and it would fold. I told myself to knock it off, to drink water, to text my sister a picture of the peacocks if I saw them. I set my phone on the dash and hit the voice recorder button because I was tired of feeling like I'd imagined things. If I caught 30 seconds of nothing, maybe my brain would leave me alone. The applause started 10 minutes later. I didn't move. I let the phone face the open air and kept both hands on the steering wheel, even though there was nowhere to drive. It swelled, gentle and complete. Somewhere in there, a tiny crackle of radio interference came from the spare radio, and I heard a voice I didn't recognize say, "Hold for applause." It might have been nothing. It might have been one of those tiny radio bleed things. It felt like someone was behind me waiting to see if I'd stand up. I stood. I picked up the flashlight, which was losing its will to live again, and walked to the corridor. The applause was not coming from inside, but it got clearer the closer I got, like the corridor mouth was a funnel. I stepped in. The shimmer was there, centered. The lily smell was stronger. For a second, I think I actually smiled because I had the delirious thought that someone had set up a weird art installation, and we were hand-wringing over it like rubes. I pointed the light down the corridor. The beam did something it doesn't do in normal air. It bent a fraction like it passed through hot gas. After that, I don't remember deciding to walk forward. I just remember my feet doing it. The applause rose, not in volume but in detail. I could hear the difference between palms. Some hands were dry, some a little sticky like they'd been holding a drink. Some claps were thoughtful. Some were eager. I swear to you, I could tell. I reached the shimmer. The air was cooler on my face. It had the feeling of being in front of an open fridge in a dark kitchen. There was something else too underneath the lily smell. Dust and old paper. A projection booth smell, if that makes sense. That's when I saw them. Not like a jump scare. Like my brain finally got enough light to build the picture. A small group of figures stood on either side of the corridor, some leaning against the marble, some with their hands clasped together like they were trying to be polite in a place where you shouldn't clap at all. Their faces weren't blank in a horror movie way. They were unresolvable, like when you try to zoom in on a face in a low-resolution video and it just never sharpens. Posture was whole, though. You can tell a lot from how someone stands. These people stood like they were waiting for me to finish something. The applause stopped like someone had closed a door. The radio clicked hard in my pocket. Sylvia's voice came through clean. "Do not go further," she said. "I'm not," I said automatically because already part of me was. I took one more step. I swear I felt the pressure change, and not in a poetic way. It popped my ears. The flashlight dimmed and flared so bright I saw spots. In that flare I saw shapes in the marble where there weren't any. Like the stone had held onto old reflections. I saw a row of chairs that weren't there. I saw a movie screen where the end wall was. I saw a single frame of leader tape with hand-drawn countdown numbers. The little polite audience leaned forward as if I was going to speak. I opened my mouth because your body does things in those seconds that your brain didn't sign off on, and the radio screamed. Not a voice. For once I was grateful for that. Just a squeal that cut through whatever I was about to say and made the carts outside chirp like car alarms. "Back up," Sylvia said without yelling, which somehow made it more urgent. I did. My heel skidded and I almost went down because the floor had a slickness it didn't have before, like condensation. The shapes at the end of the corridor did not move exactly. They compressed, like they inhaled together. The clapping started again, threadbare as if from far away. It followed me to the mouth and stopped when I stepped into open air. I walked back to the cart and turned the recorder off with shaking hands. Luis pulled up a minute later, textbook half open, hair sticking up like he'd run his hands through it a dozen times. "You look like you need water," he said. "I need to go home," I said, and then I recorded it. His eyebrows did a little skeptically impressed dance. "Play it." We played it on speaker. 30 seconds of wind. The faint sound of an engine. And then clear and impossible to argue with, nothing. 30 more seconds of nothing. No clapping. No radio crackle. No whisper of lily smell through a microphone, obviously. Just me breathing like a guy trying to pretend he wasn't doing that. Luis tried to make it normal. "Phones compress audio in weird ways," he said kindly. "Maybe it cut a frequency." My sister called me that afternoon before I slept and said, "Send it." She listened and said, "Well, that's nothing." I could hear her trying to keep the joking tone. Maybe the applause can read a non-disclosure agreement. I slept through my alarm and dreamt the kind of dream that's just your real job but fuzzier, where nothing happens except you're late and can't find your shoes. When I got to the cemetery that night, Sylvia asked to speak to me in the office. She had a cardboard box on the desk. It looked like the kind you use to hold old photos. "You're not in trouble," she said, which is exactly what people say when you're about to be. "I need you to do your rounds, stay out of the corridor after 2, and don't bring your sister back after hours. That's me covering us. Now, if you're going to ignore me and be curious anyway, I figured I'd control how much trouble you get into." She opened the box. There was a stack of cassette tapes inside, each with dates written in old felt tip. A couple had the word applause in parentheses. "Earl left these," she said. "I shouldn't keep them here. I shouldn't give them to you. They're copies. Take one, satisfy the itch, bring it back." She left the office and I sat there staring at the tapes like they had teeth. I picked one labeled AUG 1997 Applause Midnight and slid it into Dennis's old boombox. The play button stuck and I had to smack it. The sound came through soft and grainy. Night noise, insects, the world breathing. Then the clapping. No mistake. It was there. Not just there. It sounded like the thing I'd heard but older, like it had been rolled down a hill and picked up dirt. In the background, a voice said, "God, that's so weird." And another voice said, "Turn it off." And the static rose and swallowed both. I hit stop and popped the tape out and put it back in the box. I took out my phone and snapped a photo of the label before my brain could tell me not to. I texted it to Maya, who wrote, "I hate that." Then she wrote, "Don't go back." Then, 20 seconds later, "You're going to go back." She knows me. I tried to do the same thing. I avoided the corridor. I drove the long loop and checked the gates and stopped to watch a raccoon dig at something by the lake, with its little hands like a creepy person in a tiny burglar mask. I nodded at the patrol car as it rolled past with a wave from one of the officers we see all the time, the guy who plays softball on Sundays. I told myself the applause had nothing to do with me. I told myself the shimmer was heat over concrete, which made no sense at 2 in the morning in November. I told myself Sylvia was right. The place collects stories, the way some people collect cups they never use. The last night didn't start with any big sign. It started with me misplacing my flashlight and borrowing Rob's backup, which had a stronger beam and a cracked lens that threw little rainbows at the edge of things. It started with me almost forgetting to sign the logbook and Sylvia tapping the pen against the desk until I did. It started normal enough that the idea of normal could stretch and hold. At 3:13, the radio clicked and said nothing. It did that sometimes when somebody pressed the button by accident, except this time it stayed clicked. The static had a shape in it, a rhythm. Are you familiar with the way rooms learn to make certain sounds louder? How the same laugh in one room sounds twice itself in another. That's what the static did. It shaped itself into a suggestion of people clapping. I told myself not to. I did it anyway. I drove to the corridor. The air felt wrong from 20 feet away. It was like the space knew I was coming, which is such an embarrassing sentence, but there. I felt noticed. I stepped under the entry and saw the shimmer at once, bigger than before. Or maybe I was closer than I'd ever let myself be. The flashlight's cracked lens made the ripple look like it was sprouting tiny, shifting rainbows. Lily smell, paper, dust. That same compact little audience at the far end, cohesive enough now that if you'd walked in behind me, you might have said, "Who are those people?" before your brain told you not to see them. The clapping was quiet and constant like a soft rain. It didn't speed up. It didn't stop. It was a presence more than a sound, and I felt something tilt. This is the part I hate writing down because it sounds like I'm making it flowery when I'm not. The corridor was waiting. It wasn't waiting for the weird famous ghosts that live in everyone's imagination. It was waiting for me to do something incredibly stupid and human. Step forward when a room wants you to. I heard someone behind me. A real person, and turned. Luis, breathless, running like he'd dropped his textbook and sprinted from the chapel. "Hey," he said, too loud against the marble. Don't go in there." "I'm not," I said, even as my weight shifted. "Seriously," he said, and caught my sleeve. There was a look on his face I'd never seen, anger and fear. "Sylvia told me to find you." He held up the radio. Sylvia's voice thinner than usual. "Both of you come back to the office now." I made a motion like I was agreeing. Maybe I was. The little audience didn't move. The clapping didn't change. The shimmer did, though. It widened the tiniest fraction, or my eyes did. Something about it felt like standing on the edge of a stage with no guardrail. Luis tugged my sleeve again, hard enough that the fabric protested. I stepped back and felt cold air flatten against my face like a sigh. We left. We walked too fast and tried to make it look like we weren't. When we got to the office, Sylvia had the logbook open and the box of tapes gone. She looked older by about 5 years in a matter of minutes. "I'm calling it in," she said, and picked up the phone on the wall. "Just for a drive-through." 2 officers came in around 3:40. One of them was the softball guy. They were kind, the way bored, half-amused cops are when you tell them you heard weird clapping in a cemetery mausoleum. They did a walkthrough with us. Flashlight beams bouncing off marble. The corridor was quiet. No shimmer if you looked directly. And when I tried to look off to the side like I had before, all I saw was my own stupid fear hugging me like a jacket. We reached the far end with nothing to point at. The officers exchanged a look that said, not unkindly, "Okay, you called because you were spooked." They told us to call if we saw any actual people, and left with a chuckle about encore. Here's the thing that didn't make it better. When we got back to the office, the radio logged that our mics had been keyed for exactly 2 minutes and 22 seconds during the walk. The clapping, if it had happened, would have been in that window. We played back the recording Sylvia keeps of the radio traffic. It's a quiet constant, a flat line of tape hiss. A cough from Rob. Me saying copy somewhere near the beginning. And then something. At the far edge of hearing. Not applause. Not anything you could hang your mind on. Just a texture that wasn't there before we went into the corridor and ended when we came out. Dennis turned the volume until the speaker sounded like a mosquito. "Hear that?" He asked no one. We all lied and said no. I worked 2 more shifts after that. I didn't go back to the corridor. I told Maya I was thinking of quitting because my day job was getting busier. She didn't push, which I appreciated. On my last night, I did the loop one more time with the cart grumbling like always, and the peacocks yelling at nothing. I signed the logbook. I thanked Sylvia for the hours and the extra coffee. She handed me a little envelope with my name on it. Inside was a Polaroid of the lawn during a movie night. People sitting on blankets, the screen bright with a white rectangle. Written on the back in Sylvia's neat, tired handwriting, "Keep it boring." I'm writing this a few months later because I told myself I'd forget if I told the story here. Maybe somebody will read it and say, "Oh, that's a known acoustic quirk. There's a vent in the corridor floor that makes a pressure wave around 3 a.m. Maybe somebody who used to work there will say, "I knew Earl and his tapes were a gag." I would love that. I live on a street where you can hear other people's lives through thin walls. The guy upstairs practices bass badly. A couple across the hall argues in a way that never feels dangerous, only weary. A dog down the block has a bark that sounds like it's doing math in its head. I've gotten good at tuning it all out. But sometimes, usually when I'm washing dishes or when I lay in bed and the night feels like a theater before the show, I hear it. Not loud, polite, enthusiastic, 40 or 50 hands. Nobody's face in particular. I turn the faucet off to make sure it's real, and the house breathes and the pipes click, and I tell myself it's the building settling. It stops when I listen hard. It starts when I forget to. Last week, a flyer showed up in my mailbox with no return address, just a trifold thing for upcoming outdoor screenings. I smiled at the thought of people on blankets again. Summer making everybody softer. On the inside, in small print, there was a list of special events. Under this season's tribute was a title I didn't recognize and a note in italics, introduced by a former night guard. It could be anyone. That's the rational side. There are a dozen night guards over the years. People love giving little speeches. I put the flyer on the counter and tried not to look at it. I rinsed a plate. The sound of hands started soft and warm. I dried my hands and stared at the doorway, because sometimes you can see the air moving if you don't look at it straight on. The corner of my apartment near the hallway looked like a hot day. For a second I smelled lilies, then dust and old paper. It wasn't strong. It was the kind of smell that makes you think of a place instead of proving it's here. I walked over like someone answering a knock you're not sure you heard. The shimmer was so faint I could have called it imagination and kept my sanity. I held my breath the way you do when you open a fridge and you don't remember what you wanted. Somewhere down the hall, my neighbor's TV laughed at the wrong moment. The applause went on, patient, as if I was late to my cue. I don't care if anyone believes me. I'm just putting this out where I can see it and tell myself it lives on the screen and not behind my door. Not in my own air, not in that small space in the hallway where the paint peels because the building leaks when it rains. I moved the flyer to the trash and it slid back out onto the floor because the trash was too full. I didn't pick it up. I went to bed and listened to my own breathing get steadier. Right before I fell asleep, the clapping stopped like someone had closed a door. I dreamed I was walking down that corridor again and the little audience leaned forward, expectant, kind. When I woke up, my phone had a calendar alert I don't remember setting. It says, Saturday 9 p.m., Hollywood Forever. The title of the event is the same unknown one from the flyer. Under notes, a single sentence, hold for applause. I cleared it. The title grayed out and then snapped back like a bad screen refresh. I put the phone face down and the room did that quiet it does when you're waiting for something you don't want to happen. I'm not going to the screening. I'm not. I'm writing this instead, in the hope that saying it out loud makes it smaller. The sink just ticked, the way it does when the pipes settle. I'm going to pretend that's all I heard. I'm going to keep it boring. If the air in my hallway looks odd tonight, I'm going to blink and say it's the heat. If I hear hands, I'll tell myself it's a neighbor learning a rhythm. If my phone buzzes with an event I didn't set, I'll change the calendar and not think about who wrote the notes. And if I get up for water in the dark and the apartment feels like a theater before the lights go down, I'm not going to look toward the shimmer. I'll stand in the kitchen, breathe like a person, and wait for the part where nobody claps at all.